Chapter 869. This was somewhat beyond Lucifer's expectations. Even now, she still couldn't react. Her mind was in a state of chaos when the world was created. Let's call it dumbfounded. "Lucy, get up." Charlotte came in with a piece of clothing. It was a black nun's dress. It was said that this dress was worn by Charlotte when she was young, and it was modified from Mother Dellen's old clothes. In other words, this was a piece of clothing with a smell. I'm talking about the smell of inheritance. Lucifer opened her eyes and sat up in a daze. At this time, Charlotte began to fiddle with her hair, carefully combing it. She was in a very good mood. "Little Lucy, your hair is so good. You didn't wash it last night, but it's not greasy at all." Lucifer didn't want to talk to Charlotte and threw her an empty look. Charlotte quickly put on the nun's clothes for Lucifer and took her to the kitchen behind the cloister. Previously, only Mother Dellen and Charlotte lived in the cloister. Now that there was a little girl, breakfast was prepared more than usual. Shalty and Nanny Dellen would pray before eating, but Lucifer wouldn't move before that. After Nanny Dellen and Shalty finished praying, Shalty would use a spoon to feed the freshly made vegetable soup to Lucifer. When a milky white soup was fed to Lucifer's mouth, her upper and lower jaws were basically motionless. It was sticky and fragrant, and even a little fishy because of a little dried fish. The fresh soup would overflow because of this. At this time, Charlotte would quickly use a handkerchief to wipe the traces at the corner of Lucifer's mouth. The child didn't even move her mouth. Charlotte could only use her hands to provide her with a little help to help her eat, no matter if it was breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Every time Nanny Dellen saw this scene, she would sigh pitifully. She felt sorry for this child who had suffered a lot. Since Shalty took her to the village outside to ask for help, this child had been silent, as if she had been greatly stimulated. Because the way out was affected by the landslide, they were still trapped. On the other hand, the monastery had stored up a lot of food, and there was even a cultivated vegetable field behind it. Food would not be a problem in the short term. The Reverend Mother and Charty did not use mobile phones. There was only a landline in the monastery, and communication had not been restored. Perhaps the landline was broken due to the landslide. The two nuns, one old and one young, did not feel much annoyed by this situation. They said that all they had to do was wait patiently. Compared to that, Nanny Dellen and Shalty were more concerned about how to get the poor child to speak. What they didn't know was that the great queen of hell, Lucifer, who was sitting on the pride throne of the original sin, didn't finish her sentence because of the punishment of not being able to lie, and also because she was worried about Nanny Dellen. The last time she went out, she used an ancient spell to summon a blood elf in the forest, but it was purified, melted. This was what happened. That day, Lucifer happily followed Shalty back to the monastery on the old motorcycle. At night, she sneaked into Nanny Dellen's room, intending to use Nanny Dellen's flesh and blood as food to raise the blood elf. Nanny Dellen, who had been praying devoutly for decades, had never married and had maintained her purity. A seed of holy power had been born in her body, although there was still a long time before it could be activated, and with Nanny Dellen's age, it was probably too late even if there was a systematic method. However, this could not deny that this was the best material Lucifer could find. Most importantly, Reverend Dellen was too devout. The moment the blood elf attached itself to Reverend Dellen's chest, it was destroyed by the hidden power of Reverend Dellen's sacred power seed before it could devour her. It was destroyed. If they were destroyed, then so be it. As the noble queen of hell, she had countless knowledge. Even if Lucifer's plan failed, she naturally had other methods. But she couldn't defeat Nanny Dellen. She couldn't even defeat Nanny Dellen. She couldn't even defeat Shalty because she was just a child now. She didn't have the ability to lift anything heavy. She would be tired after taking 2 steps, and she would be hungry when the time was up. She couldn't even lie. She had to answer many questions directly. Lucifer felt very tired. She simply let herself give up on herself temporarily, just like a child with autism. This was to prevent the 2 nuns from asking her too much about herself. How should an autistic child get along? Generally speaking, it was necessary to be patient and gentle. Try to guide the child to think about happy things, and try not to touch the child's bad memories. Because Lucifer appeared like a child who had been abused, after Nanny Delon and Shalty discussed it, they decided not to ask about little Lucy's past as much as possible. Instead, they chose to slowly open little Lucy's heart. Although little Lucy didn't say a word or even respond to her for the past few days, Nanny Delon didn't lack patience. She even chose to tell little Lucy a short story from the Bible whenever she had free time to teach her how to be a good person. Nanny Delon even played the piano well. There was a very old piano in the auditorium, but it was well maintained. Nanny Delon would call Shalty to sing hymns here in the afternoon. Shalty's singing voice was really good. It could even be described as beautiful. In this secluded monastery, the old nanny and the young nun were enjoying themselves. Time passed quietly. This was like an ideal place that stood aloof from worldly affairs. It was just that there was an autistic queen of hell. Lucifer still looked like she had nothing to live for. When she was brought to the auditorium to listen to the hymns, she didn't even blink her eyes. She just looked at the statue of the Virgin Mary in front of her. Suddenly, there was a change in Lucifer's eyes. They were no longer empty, but gradually regained their color. This was because Shalty's singing had suddenly stopped, and Nanny Delon's music had also disappeared. But they didn't actually stop. They still kept singing and playing the piano. Nanny Delon even looked at Shalty at this time, with an intoxicated smile on her face. Shalty also put her hands together, closed her eyes, and opened her mouth. She was singing a high-pitched part, but they stopped as if they pressed the pause button. Lucifer suddenly stood up and quickly looked around. Finally, she suddenly looked up because she heard a slight sound. It was a sound that could make her instinctively hate, the gospel from the kingdom of heaven. Above the auditorium, fluttering feathers suddenly fell from the ceiling. These white feathers were illusory, but they were like falling cherry blossoms. At this time, a figure slowly descended from the ceiling. Lucifer, my brother, long time no see. Gabriel, who was wearing a plain straw sandal, stood with his hands behind his back, silently observing Lucifer's appearance. Lucifer's back was slightly sweaty. She hadn't been so nervous for many years. Long time no see. Lucifer calmly smiled. You're the angel of gospel, Gabriel. Why are you not spreading the gospel in the kingdom of heaven? Why are you interested in coming to the human world? Look at you, Lucifer, my brother. Gabriel slowly said, although I don't know what you've experienced, I'm more willing to believe that this is a punishment from fate for disobeying your father. In fact, I've been here for 2 days, and I've been observing you these 2 days. Lucifer sneered. It's just like how he only watches the world from the kingdom of heaven. Sure enough, you two have the same desire to peep at others. Gabriel wasn't angry. Instead, he said with a smile, Father told me to come and see you, but he didn't say what I should do. I think you want me to deal with it myself. I wanted to take you back, but now I've changed my mind. Lucifer narrowed her eyes. At this moment, Gabriel looked around at Nanny Theron and then at Shalty. Suddenly, he waved his hand and said, This Nanny Theron will be a good petitioner. On the day she reaches the end of her life, I'll come and take her away as a reward for her taking care of you. What did you say? Lucifer suddenly had a bad feeling. I know you can't use your power now. Your body is too weak and dangerous, Gabriel said indifferently. Gabriel said mildly, I'll activate Mother Delon's seed of holy power and give Sister Charity the seed of gospel. This way, they can avoid many dangers. Lucifer's heart sank to the bottom of the abyss. Gabriel waved his hand again. Suddenly, shackles made of holy light appeared on Lucifer's hands, and a chain made of holy light was attached to the left shackle. The chain extended to Shalty's and Grandma Delon's hands and finally disappeared. My brothers, they'll take care of you for me. Gabriel spread his wings. Then goodbye. Wait, Gabriel, you can't do this to me. Lucifer roared at the rising figure. Come down. Come down. I'll wait until the day you regret it. The illusory feathers suddenly disappeared. Only Gabriel's voice echoed and faded away. At this moment, the sound of the piano and the singing started again. Lucifer sat down weakly with her head lowered. She knew she couldn't leave the 2 nuns. The shackles Gabriel had put on her had tied her to them. Lucifer suddenly thought of a certain monkey who had been suppressed under a mountain for 500 years. Many years ago, Lucifer had once gone to see that monkey. Looking at the monkey drinking copper and iron juice at that time, she had laughed wantonly. Every dog has its day, and every dog has its day. Gabriel, one day I'll fight my way up. I'll use a transformation spell to turn you into a sow and put you in the dirtiest pigsty. Oh, my child, how can you say that? Mother Theron suddenly stopped and rushed to Lucifer's side. She said solemnly, "This is blasphemy. My God." As she spoke, Mother Delon began to put her hands together and quickly recited the scripture of repentance for her. Lucifer only felt that the invisible shackles on her hands were burning like fire. She was in great pain and broke out in cold sweat. Mother Theron, little Lucy is foaming at the mouth. Ganhong knew it was impolite to laugh like this, so she quickly covered her mouth. She suddenly thought of Song Ying. If Missing was here, she probably wouldn't let go of this opportunity to ridicule Zhong Luoyue. Zhong Luoyue just glanced at Ganhong casually. Ouyang Jie came out to smooth things over. "Master, you're being naughty again. This is Miss Zhong, my boss now." Zhong Luoyue said, "It's okay. I made a fool of myself in front of Mr. Tuesday." At the same time, I realized how ignorant people are. Tushini shook his head and looked at Zhong Luoyue. She said softly, "We are always willing to make wild guesses, but often ignore the truth. And we always like to imagine things that are originally very simple. In the end, it's just that people's hearts are a little complicated. Thank you, Mr. Tu, for giving me such a lesson." Tushini nodded. "You're eloquent and smart, but a little eager to show yourself. You still lack some calmness, but it's rare for someone your age. Well, you said your surname is Zhong. Are you from the Zhong family in Hua Nation?" "Yes." Zhong Luoyue nodded with a smile. Tushini nodded again, and then looked at Luochio and Ganhong. "What about these two?" "Master, they came with Miss Song Ying from the Song family." Ouyang Jie hurriedly said at this time. "It's just that they were in a hurry and didn't have time to formally introduce each other." Tushini waved his hand and motioned for Ouyang Jie to stop talking. Instead, he looked at Luochio and said, "How did you get here? I spent a lot of effort building this vineyard. It's easy for ordinary people to get lost. Recently, I went to a relative's house. He has a lot of books there." Luochio smiled and said, "There are a lot of books on the Book of Changes and the 8 Trigrams. I looked at them a few more times, but I didn't expect that they would come in handy." Ganhong was stunned. There were indeed a lot of ancient books in the hall, where Father Song kept the bookshelves, but Master Chiu just looked at them casually and didn't look like he had studied them carefully. Now that she thought about it, Ganhong realized how complicated this vineyard was. It was a little hard to understand. Just in time. Tushini nodded. She didn't know what he was thinking, but he just said indifferently, "You just happen to be good." As the saying goes, there are no stories without coincidences. Many things in this world seem to have no pattern, but in the end, they are still connected. There is no such thing as an independent development of all things. It may seem unintentional, but who knows if it's intentional or not? But Tushini paused. "Ajay is my disciple, so it's normal for him to come back and look for me. What about you? Why are you here?" Luochio looked around. "I actually wanted to pick some grapes, but I wanted to find the best ones, so I ended up here." "Pick grapes?" Tushini was startled. "To give them away." Luochio nodded. Tushini muttered to himself for a moment, then suddenly said, "The grapes here are indeed the best in the entire vineyard. It's quite impressive that you were able to find this place. However, I didn't say that I could give them to you if you wanted to pick them." "That's a pity." Luochio nodded. "I was reckless. But it's not like I can't give them to you. It's also fate that you were able to come here. In any case, I'm the host, so I can't disappoint my guests. How about this?" Tushini suddenly smiled. "There's still some time. Play a game of Go with me. If you beat me, I'll let you pick some grapes. How about that? I guarantee that they'll be the best grapes in this area." Luochio said, "Chess." Tushini nodded. "Is there a problem?" Luochio shook his head. "I haven't learned it yet." Tushini was startled. He asked curiously, "Then why did you watch us play Go just now?" Luochio said matter-of-factly. Watching without speaking is the most basic courtesy, isn't it? Tushini was startled. He nodded. How about this? Tell me what kind of Go game you know. Luochio thought for a moment and said, I know how to play Go, but I haven't played it many times. I only know a little about Go, and I've lost a lot of games against computers. I'm afraid the only one I'm familiar with is Gomoku. Chapter 870. The chessboard of chess was very different from the chessboard of Gomoku. The chess side only had 16 flags, which was far less than the number of chess pieces held by the Gomoku side. Simply put, if the chess pieces were used as substitutes, one side could only play 16 times at most. Because of the space of the chessboard, the paths that could be connected to 5 pieces were limited. If the other rules of Gomoku were included, such as the forbidden move, the 3-hand exchange, or the mountain pass rule, etc., then this Gomoku game with only 16 moves was much more difficult than imagined. Whether it was Ouyang Jie or Zhong Luiwei, they were both people with excellent memory and proficient in algorithms, so they could easily calculate the possibility of connecting 5 pieces. Basically, if one didn't deliberately give in to the other, the most likely outcome would be a draw between the two sides. However, Tushini said that he could only pick the grapes if he won. In other words, Luochio could only win. There was no doubt that this might be a chess game that was destined to be a draw from the beginning. In terms of the conditions of the chess game, Tushini still had the upper hand. You are the guest. You can choose to play first or later. Tushini made a gesture of invitation and added, there is a forbidden move. Luochio nodded and picked up a chariot. He did not immediately put it down. Instead, he asked, we only use the chess pieces here. Tushini nodded. This game is very simple. We only use 16 chess pieces from each side. Understood. Luochio smiled slightly, then put it on the upper right corner of the chessboard. I choose the black piece. Chess was different from the chessboard of Go. It was composed of small square pieces neatly arranged. There were a total of 8 rows and 8 columns, a total of 64 grids. Luochio put it on the upper right corner, which was the position of H8. Seeing Luochio put it in this position, Ouyang Jie and Zhong Luiwei frowned at the same time. If it were them, even if they knew that it was a draw, they would put it in the center of the chessboard. At least they could create more possibilities for themselves. At least they would not lose half of their chances at the beginning. Not to mention, there was a forbidden move. Tushini glanced at Luochio. Seeing that this young man was calm, he smiled slightly, picked up a chariot, and put it on the position of d5. Then, Luochio picked up another chariot and put it on the position of h7. Tushini also picked up a chariot and put it on the position of c5. Luochio picked up a bishop at this time and put it on the position of h6. Tushini looked up at Luochio again, nodded, picked up a bishop, and put it on the position of d4. Luochio picked up the second bishop and put it on the position of h5. Tushini shook his head at this time, picked up his second bishop, and prepared to put it on the position of h4. However, just as Tushini's bishop was about to land, it suddenly stopped. He raised his head and looked at Luochio strangely. In the end, Tushini did not put down his bishop, but put it back in the chess box. Then, under the surprised gaze of Ouyang Jie and Zhong Luiwei, he stood up and said, wait a minute. Tushini walked to another table under the grape trellis, took a hollow bamboo basin and a pair of scissors. He looked up at the plump fruits hanging down from the grape trellis. Finally, he chose a bunch and cut it with a pair of scissors. Then, he came to Luochio. Take it. Luochio smiled and said apologetically, I cheated. A win is a win. A loss is a loss. Tushini shook his head. It was my mistake to not set the rules in the beginning. But you're right, this was indeed a trick, and it's also considered breaking the rules. It's just that the rules were originally set by people. It's up to you. Thank you for the grapes. Mr. Tuesday. Luochio nodded slightly. I've already gotten what I wanted, and I think that since Mr. Tu picked them himself, they must be the best here. Then, I won't disturb Mr. Tu and your student. Ganhong, let's go. Oh. Ganhong was stunned, but seeing that young Master Chiu was really leaving without any hesitation, she hurriedly put on her shoes and followed him. It seemed that the bruise on her heel did not hurt at all. Gan Hong looked at it subconsciously and found that there were only some red marks. Strange, it should be a bruise? Master, why did you admit defeat in this game? After Luochio left, Ouyang Jie sat down and frowned. You haven't played yet, right? Tu Shini said indifferently. Then tell me, where should I play? Ouyang Jie subconsciously pointed to the position of h4. Of course it should be here, or he would have specified. Wait, wasn't specified beforehand. Could it be outside the chessboard? Tu Shini smiled and began to tidy up the chessboard and chess pieces on the table. He didn't beat me with chess skills. He beat me with something outside the rules. This is cheating. Ouyang Jie shook his head. Tu Shini said slowly. Is using the chessboard to play Gamoku proper? He asked me if I could only play with this chess piece, but he didn't say that I had to play on the chessboard. Ouyang Jie opened his mouth, but he was speechless. Winning is winning. Losing is losing. It's not like I haven't lost before. Tu Shini said earnestly. It's just a bunch of grapes I can afford to lose. But Ouyang Jie wanted to say something. Tu Shini shook his head and patted Ouyang Jie's shoulder gently. It's about time. You take Ms. Zhong to the cellar first. I will go back and change my clothes. It's about time to go over. Tu Shini walked out from the grape rack and looked around. Then he chuckled. Outside the chessboard, the person playing chess, he sure has a big heart. Then he left with his hands behind his back. Luochio had said that he wanted to give the freshly picked grapes away as a gift. Gan Hong had thought that they might be something he wanted to bring back for his father. However, Gan Hong suddenly realized that the grapes that Master Chiu was holding had disappeared. Maybe he dropped it somewhere. Luo, Chiu didn't care about it. It's not easy to win it back. Let me go and look for it. Gan Hong hesitated. However, before she could put her plan into action, they were immediately found by Song Ying when they returned to the banquet hall. Song Ying scolded them for running around. However, when she learned from Gan Hong that they had met the god of gamblers, Tu Shini, and that Luochio had played a game of Gamoku with him, Song Ying's eyes widened in disbelief. She knew that Gan Hong would not lie to her. At least, there was no need for her to do so. However, because it was true, Song Ying felt helpless. She had planned to steal some grapes from others on a whim, and then met the legendary god of gamblers. Why did such a plot sound like a student who had just entered the campus meeting an old man who was sweeping the floor? The old man was the principal. You met Tu Shini. Did you invite him to join the Song dynasty? After Song Ying complained in her heart, she immediately asked. Luochio shook his head and asked curiously, Can I represent the Song dynasty group? Of course you can. Song Ying glared at him and snorted, No. Luochio smiled and did not care. At this time, Luochio suddenly saw a lot of guests gathered in a corner of the hall. He asked curiously, What are they doing? Do you want to know? Song Ying crossed her arms and continued to snort. See for yourself. Luochio nodded and walked toward the crowd in the corner. Song Ying looked and suddenly stared. She was inexplicably irritated and stomped her feet. So obedient? At this time, there was a sudden exclamation from the crowd in the corner. Gan Hong was very experienced as a follower. Before Luochio arrived, she had already squeezed through the crowd so that Luochio could easily see the thing that surprised the guests. It was a man in an old suit. He was leaning against the wall and sitting on the ground with his legs crossed. The man's face was slightly pale, and there were some roots on his face. He looked like he was about 40 years old. His hair was messy, and he had a typical Oriental face. No matter how one looked at it, this man was out of tune with the people present. He looked like a poor man who had mistakenly entered a rich people's gathering. At this time, this slightly down-and-out man was holding a bead that was bigger than a fist in one hand. It looked like a crystal, or maybe it was just a glass product. In front of the destitute man was a slightly plump middle-aged man. This middle-aged man was squatting in front of the down-and-out man at this time. He was seriously looking at the polished crystal ball in his hand. The exclamation came from his mouth. Oh, my God, it changed again. This time it's Changha. Incredible. The middle-aged man exclaimed again. Luochio looked at the small ball in the down-and-out man's hand with interest. At this time, Gan Hong asked a lady next to her, Excuse me, what happened here? The lady glanced at the man's clothes and said casually, "This man said that he has a treasure in his hand. Different people can see different sceneries through it. It's like a small world is hidden inside." Some people didn't believe it, so they tried it. Maybe it's true? My God. Hearing the lady's tone, she was probably one of the people who were watching the show. A small ball that can see different sceneries? Ganhong looked at Luochio in confusion. Song Ying followed behind him. What an incredible treasure. At this time, the middle-aged man looked slightly excited and said directly, "Sir, are you selling this treasure ball? Please name a price. I want to have it. It's too exquisite, too incredible." "I'm sorry, this treasure ball is not for sale." The down-and-out man spoke fluent local language and said indifferently, "This is probably the only one in the world. If I sell it to you, I won't have it anymore." The middle-aged man was unwilling to give up and said quickly, "Name a price, no matter how expensive it is. It's really a treasure, and it's far from what gemstones and diamonds can compare to. This, do you want to consider it?" The middle-aged man's attitude was not bad. He only begged the other party to sell it, and did not force the other party to sell it. He even offered a shocking price. On one hand, it was because he cherished his reputation. After all, there were many people who were famous here. On the other hand, although this person looked down and out, he could pass through layers of checks and come here without being chased away. He was probably a guest invited by the god of gamblers, or someone who had the ability to get an invitation letter. "Okay, please give me some time to think about it." The down-and-out man seemed to shake his head, and there was a reluctant expression on his face, as if he could not make a decision, pretending to be mysterious. Suddenly, a voice came from the crowd. It was Song Ying who said it. The down-and-out man looked at the voice and saw Song Ying. The down-and-out man smiled. "Whether it's real or fake, you'll know when you see it." As he said that, the down-and-out man slowly stood up, holding the treasure ball in his hand, and walked in front of Song Ying. He slowly lifted the treasure ball and placed it in front of Song Ying's eyes. Song Ying did not have a good impression of this guy who was trying to get attention from the crowd, but this treasure ball was placed in front of her, and it was not easy to not look at it. She sighed and looked at the treasure ball. "Isn't there nothing? What a scam." Song Ying frowned. This treasure ball was just an ordinary glass bead. Other than the fact that it was a little too big, there was nothing special about it at all. "You have to look at it with your heart," the down-and-out man said indifferently. "Legend has it that fish only have a memory of 7 seconds, so they can't remember so many beautiful things in the world. It's too cruel for them. There's a type of fish that, in order to keep the beautiful things they have seen, they seal their memories in their tears." How many years have passed? The down-and-out man's voice was full of magnetism, like washing on the beach or the evening waves. It had a kind of gentleness that made people feel comfortable listening to it. And how many years have passed, the tears that fell gathered into a bead and entrusted the beautiful things they have seen in their lives. Why do you look at it with suspicion? Song Ying looked at the treasure ball, and her gaze gradually changed. This treasure ball was originally transparent, and she could even see the lines on the down-and-out man's palm through its material. But at this time, it suddenly became hazy, as if something was brewing inside this treasure ball. It was as if it was covered by countless white clouds. When the clouds parted, Song Ying saw an island in the middle of the sea. Blue sky, blue sea, white fine sand. This was a primitive land that had not been polluted, and it was more beautiful than any of the so-called pirate tourist holy lands she had ever been to. So beautiful. Song Ying subconsciously reached out her hands and picked up the treasure ball from the down-and-out man's hands, as if she was possessed. At this time, Luochio suddenly covered the treasure ball with his hand, blocking Song Ying's line of sight, and at the same time, holding the treasure ball in his hand. Song Ying was stunned for a moment, but she saw Luochio looking at the down-and-out man at this time, and said indifferently, "Can I see it too?" Yin yin, yin yin PS1. Thank you to the cute owner of Smoke Addict Jiangshan, sending my purest beep to the capitalist boss. Chapter 871. He didn't seem to be so abrupt as to say, "I also want to see it." Everyone was curious, especially in the face of magical things. no matter if it was an adult or a child. Although Song Ing was a little annoyed that Luochio interrupted her, the Song family would never scold the Song family in front of outsiders, so she didn't say a word. On the contrary, Song Ing was even vaguely curious. She was curious to see Luochio's surprised expression, to see if this guy was really like an old monk. Of course, it won't refuse anyone who praises it. The down-and-out man smiled at this time, making a gesture of invitation. Of course, in addition to the intention, stupid people can also see it. Why? Luochio asked back. Everyone seemed to be curious. The stout businessman at the beginning slightly straightened his chest, because he saw it. The down-and-out man said indifferently, "Ignorance will blind our eyes. Since our eyes are blinded, how can we see the beauty of things?" Luochio nodded, holding the treasure ball, and began to look at it. But first, he glanced at the guests around. They were all looking at him expectantly. Most of them knew Song Ing. If even the little princess of the Song dynasty saw the beauty of the treasure ball, then this treasure ball might be a real treasure. With the wealth of the Song dynasty, there was no need to deceive anyone. At the beginning, they considered that this down-and-out man might be a swindler, but miraculously, they dispelled a lot of thoughts because of this. "Well, let me see." Luochio smiled at this time, holding the treasure ball, and began to pace. It seemed that he had just gotten a treasure and was studying it in his own study, as if there was no one around. When Luochio walked towards the crowd and almost bumped into the crowd, the guests tacitly took the initiative to give way. But Luochio quickly turned around and paced to the other side. When he came over, the guests here also took the initiative to give way. At this moment, Luochio raised the treasure ball up to his level. As for the crystal chandelier on the ceiling of the hall, he seemed to want to see it more clearly. Song Ing looked at Luochio nervously. Could it be that he couldn't see anything? Wouldn't he have to admit that he was an idiot in front of so many people? Even though her feelings towards Luochio's existence were somewhat complicated, and she didn't even know how to face this descendant of the Song family who was like her, Song Ing didn't want Luochio to be ridiculed at this moment. Even if he was going to be ridiculed, she should be the one taking the initiative. There doesn't seem to be enough light. Luochio shook his head. The downtrodden man just stood there casually with a smile on his face. This time, he didn't speak up like Song Ing. At this time, Luochio suddenly thought of something. He picked up the treasure ball and quickly walked to the window. Under the sunlight, he began to carefully examine the treasure ball, but there was no movement for a long time. "How is it you really can't see anything?" Song Ing quickly walked to Luochio's side and asked in a low voice. "What do you want me to see?" Luochio asked in a low voice. Song Ing glared at him and lowered her voice again. "This matter is a bit strange. That guy might have a problem. But there are so many people here, just pretend to see something and casually say a few words. Afterwards, you can ask that guy clearly. My state just now was a bit absent-minded. I don't know how to describe it, but it was a bit strange. But I definitely won't allow you to lose face of the Song family in front of outsiders." Luochio smiled slightly and suddenly moved the treasure ball in his hand and put it under the sunlight. The moment the treasure ball came in contact with the sunlight, it seemed to brighten a bit. "It's not good for me to say what I saw. Let everyone see it together," Luochio said seriously. "Today is a beautiful thing, so let's share it." Because the treasure ball absorbed the sunlight, it seemed to be plated with a layer of colorful shell. It suddenly refracted countless rays of light, like a rainbow. In an instant, wherever the refracted rays of light shone, countless sceneries appeared. The magnificent sea, the pure and unpolluted islands, the magnificent and majestic waterfalls, the pavilions and towers, the mountains and rivers. They were like a real world that was seamlessly pieced together. The guests could even see the sparkling blue waves of the sea blown by the sea breeze, see the unceasing flow of the waterfall, see the swaying leaves of the palm trees, and also see the butterflies fluttering in the fields of flowers. It was like being in a strange country. The down-and-out man's expression was a bit stiff at this moment. He slightly opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but at the same time, he slightly frowned. When Luochio put away the treasure ball, those rich and beautiful sceneries instantly disappeared. A lady even let out a sound because she was unwilling to part with it, full of yearning. When everyone looked at the treasure ball, their gaze had already changed. Women who loved beautiful things by nature even had a burning desire to possess them in their eyes. Men were reevaluating its value. Luaccio returned to the down-and-out man and gave the treasure ball to him. It's really a great thing. No matter if it's really the condensation of the tears of a magical fish or a powerful craftsman who used uncanny craftsmanship to put all these sceneries into it, it's good. The down-and-out man suddenly smiled and took the treasure ball back from Luaccio's hand. He walked to the place where he sat at the beginning, the corner of the wall, where there was an old handbag. Under the gaze of everyone, the down-and-out man put the treasure ball back into the handbag and picked it up. He even put on a black top hat. That's why I said this is the only one-of-a-kind thing in the world. It's really hard to choose whether to sell it or not. No matter how much it costs. I want it. I want it too. You must sell it to me. The guests flocked to him in an instant and turned into a sea of people, drowning the down-and-out man in an instant. Among the crowd, the down-and-out man could only see that the black top hat was protected by his hands and then moved with difficulty. As for what they were talking about, no one could hear clearly. Which treasure ball is real? Song Ying still felt it was inconceivable. Haven't you already seen it? Luaccio asked back. Song Ying frowned. How did you know to put it under the sun? Luaccio thought for a while and said, I just tried. For example, those who got the secret letter in the novel but didn't know how to open it, they would also try to roast it with fire or soak it in water. Well, it's probably like that. Song Ying looked up very seriously and looked straight at Luaccio's eyes. After a while, she said, Why don't you go to heaven? You have to pay the price for going to heaven. Luaccio shook his head. Actually, it's not bad to walk on the ground. Master Chiu, missing, that man is gone. Unexpectedly, Gan Hong suddenly interrupted the fight between Song Ying and Luaccio. Song Ying looked back and saw that the guests who surrounded the down-and-out man were looking around blankly. They couldn't find that guy's trace and were searching everywhere. Song Ying frowned and waved her hand. Soon, a woman dressed like an intellectual quickly walked to Song Ying. She was Song Ying's secretary in the office. She couldn't command Gan Hong now, so she had to call the secretary over. She didn't really think that Luaccio was the one who carried her bag. When the secretary came over and saw Luaccio, she was startled and quickly nodded, showing a grateful expression. Song Ying noticed and just said casually, Sume, look for that man just now. The thing in his hand is good. I'll see if I can buy it and give it to the old man. Yes, Miss Ying. Sume's secretary nodded quickly and left quickly. At this time, Gan Hong also asked Luaccio, Master Chiu, do we need to look for him too? Look for him for what? Gan Hong asked curiously, That treasure, Master Chiu, don't you want it? Luaccio said indifferently, If you want too many things, it will become endless. Since you've already seen it, isn't it good enough? Only memories will not be lost. Gan Hong was startled and looked at Luaccio blankly. Is there something on my face? Luaccio asked. Gan Hong shook her head. No, it's just that I suddenly feel that young master is very similar to a teacher in the village. Teacher? Luaccio was interested. Gan Hong nodded and said, He's also Chinese. I don't know where father found him. But he can't see. We all call him Mr. Blind. He said something similar. Seems like you like this teacher very much. Luaccio nodded. Otherwise, you wouldn't remember what he said. Mr. Blind did teach us a lot, but young master, don't misunderstand, this isn't like it's respect. Gan Hong quickly said, Let's go over there and take a look. Luaccio smiled. At this time, Song Ying walked over and glared at him. Don't run around. Okay. Luaccio nodded. Song Ying suddenly swallowed all the words she wanted to say. Why isn't he following the rules? At this time, Luaccio walked to the side of a servant in the manor and said, Can you open all the windows in the hall? I feel a bit stuffy. There are quite a lot of people smoking here. The servant nodded. This request of the guest was not a big deal. Indeed, many people hated the smell of smoke. In fact, he also felt that the air here was indeed a little turbid, causing the fresh flowers that had just been moved here to lose their original fragrance. It was really a waste. Okay, please wait a moment. I'll open it right away. The servant nodded politely. In the corridor, the down-and-out man looked back and found that no one was following him. Then he leaned against a window in the corridor, took off his hat, and fanned himself a few times. After that, the down-and-out man suddenly put his leather bag on the window frame, opened the zipper, and then took out the treasure ball. He casually tossed it up and put it under the window where the sunlight shone. He carefully looked at it, shook his head, and then directly threw the treasure ball out of the window. Seems like there are more uninvited guests. The down-and-out man muttered and closed the window again. At this time, footsteps came from the front of the corridor. Not far away, a pale-faced woman wearing black gauze clothes and a gauze hat slowly walked over. Behind the woman was a cautious old man. The down-and-out man didn't move, but just leaned against the wall, waiting for the old man and the woman to come to him. "So fast. I thought you would be late," the down-and-out man suddenly said. This woman was the one who Luochio and Gan Hong met in the courtyard. Even her eyebrows were white, suspected to have albinism. She said indifferently, "The weather is cooler. It's more convenient to travel, so I'm a bit early." The down-and-out man glanced at the wooden box in the woman's arms and suddenly reached out to touch it. Unexpectedly, the old man behind the woman quickly blocked the down-and-out man's hand with a black umbrella in his hand. The old man slightly shook his wrist, and the handle of the black umbrella suddenly bounced up. The umbrella rib was full of cold light. This was a sharp sword hidden in the umbrella, shining with silver light. "Mr. Longza, our miss doesn't like strangers approaching. Please go away," the old man said indifferently. The down-and-out man, Mr. Longza, shrugged, leaned back, and slowly said, 20 years ago, your father disappeared after drinking the red spider lily. 20 years later, you brought the remaining half bottle of red spider lily. Do you believe Tushini's words, Elizabeth?" The woman with white eyebrows. Elizabeth casually glanced at Mr. Longza. "Then why did you bring your limbo?" "I didn't say I brought it." Mr. Longza smiled, casually picked up his leather bag, and took it out. "If you don't believe me, I can let you check it." The old man used the black umbrella to block it, his eyes shining. "Deceiver of the Longza family. I'll say it again. Please don't approach our Mississippi." Relax, Mr. Amonst. Mr. Longza looked scared, squinting his eyes, and said, "For us, it's very stressful to be stared at by a former holy knight of the Holy See, especially when this former holy knight is holding a pure silver sword in his hand." The old man snorted coldly. Mr. Longza patted his leather bag, smiled, and said, "Well, I'll go find someone else to chat. I won't disturb you." As he spoke, he walked past Elizabeth and Almond, but he quickly stopped and did not turn around. Instead, he quickly said, "Free information. Today, other than us, Tushini seems to have invited some other guests as well." Elizabeth and Amonst looked at each other, and Mr. Longza had already disappeared from the corridor. Elizabeth whispered, "Grandpa, be careful." Chapter 872. Lady Eve lived on the top floor of West Tower with her own servant, a young and beautiful girl named Bela. Lady Eve had just returned from outside. The servant opened the door for her. Lady Eve said casually, "Bela, I want to take a bath. Can you prepare some rose petals for me?" "Yes, ma'am." Bela left respectfully. The room was lavishly decorated. Lady Eve slowly walked to the dressing table and sat down. With gentle movements, she took out a small flat box from her bag and opened it. It was the folded handkerchief. Lady Eve slowly lifted the handkerchief and spread it open. The pure white handkerchief was stained with a little bit of blood that looked like plum blossoms. Lady Eve grabbed the handkerchief with both hands and brought it to her nose. She took a deep breath with an intoxicated look on her face. After a long time, Madame Eve put down her hand and sighed slowly. Then she sighed again. Lady Eve folded the handkerchief again and put it back in the small box. Then she put it back into the dressing table drawer. Lady Eve looked at herself in the mirror. She noticed that the ends of her hair were a little messy. She carefully tidied it up and even trimmed her eyebrows. Lady Eve stood up and walked to the window. She took out an exquisite box about 40 centimeters in size from the bedside cupboard. She pressed the ring on her finger into one of the grooves on the box and twisted it a little. Then She heard the sound of some mechanism being activated and the box's lock was unlocked. Lady Eve opened the box. Inside was a similarly exquisite crystal bottle. The bottle was filled with a dark red liquid that was close to black. However, the liquid only filled half of the bottle. Lady Eve put her hand on the bottle stopper. She held it for a long time, but didn't pull it out. She shook her head. Then, she put the bottle back into the exquisite box and locked it again. At this moment, the maid, Bella, knocked on the door. "Madam, the petals are ready." Madam Eve put away the box, stood up, swung her dress, and opened the door of the room. Bella saw a touch of purple appear in front of her. She was a little dazed. Ma'am was always so beautiful. It was as if she hadn't changed at all since 5 years ago. Lady Eve was a legendary woman with many outstanding lovers in the British social circle. "Bella, am I beautiful?" "Yes, ma'am. You're the most beautiful." Bella's eyes were infatuated. Lady Eve smiled and asked again, "Am I more beautiful than the woman holding the cat in the study?" "Yes, I'm more beautiful than her." Bella's voice gradually calmed down, without any fluctuation. Lady Eve stroked Bella's cheek. She touched Bella's youthful and compact skin. Then, she took Bella's hand and gently pulled her into the room. "Come on, help me change my clothes." At this time, the heavy wooden door slowly closed. It seemed that only the clear and melodious laughter could be vaguely heard. Squeak, Ouyang Jie thought. Then, he led Zhong Luoyue into the room, the study of the god of gamblers, Tu Shini. Before Ouyang Jie and Zhong Luoyue came in, Tu Shini had already changed his clothes. Other than the strange appearance of the white half-mask, there was a scholarly air about him. They had just come back from the grape field outside. Tu Shini directly asked Ouyang Jie and Zhong Luoyue to sit at the desk. "Tell me, you said you have something to discuss with me. What is it?" Ouyang Jie said bluntly. "Master, let me introduce some more to you. This is Miss Zhong Luoyue. She is currently the boss of the Four Seasons Group and also the owner of the Four Seasons Casino. This time, she wants to see you." Tu Shini glanced at Zhong Luoyue. Zhong Luoyue said seriously, "Mr. Tu, I wonder if you're willing to return to the martial arts world?" Tu Shini didn't seem to be surprised by Zhong Luoyue's intentions. After hearing her words, he said indifferently, "Well, it's not bad to be direct and not beat around the bush. But since you've successfully recruited Ajay and he's already won last year's competition for you, why do you still want to invite me?" Zhong Luoyue said calmly, "Because I don't want to see the day when I meet Mr. Tu at the gambling table. Mr. Tu, you should know that no one is willing to lose, and there's even a possibility of losing. I've already washed my hands of gambling." Tu Shini shook his head. "It's the world of the young now. Ajay has already learned all my skills, and I've also taught him all the gambling skills I know. My era has passed, but Ajay's era has just begun. He's still young, and in the future, he'll have the ability to create better skills than mine." Tu Shini said this with a smile. "Miss Zhong, you've already won a place for your family in the gambling world at such a young age. You're not inferior to men, so you should be a brave person. Why can't you think this through?" "It's a very simple question. I hope Mr. Tu can answer me," Zhong Luoyue suddenly asked. Tu Shini made a pleased gesture. Zhong Luoyue said, "If you were to bet with Ajay right now, who would win?" Ouyang Jie looked at Zhong Luoyue in surprise. Obviously, he didn't expect Zhong Luoyue to ask such a direct question. Between the master and the disciple who learned the master's skills, who was more outstanding? Ouyang Jie looked at his master, Tu Shini. Can I win against my master now? He even asked himself this question subconsciously. Tu Shini shook his head. I've already said that I've washed my hands of gambling, and I won't get involved in the gambling world anymore. Even if it's Ajay, I won't gamble again. Miss Zhong, I know what you're worried about, but I can promise you that there's no such person as the god of gamblers, Tu Shini, in this world. There's only a guy hiding in this small vineyard, leading a drunken life. After saying this, Tu Shini directly stood up. It's getting late. I'll go to the wine cellar to prepare. Miss Zhong, if you're interested in my wine, you can also come to our wine tasting party. Tu Shini walked to the door of the study room. Zhong Luoyue suddenly said, Mr. Two, please wait. How's the wealth of my Zhong family in Mr. Two's eyes? The peak of the aristocratic families is nothing more than this. Tu Shini said indifferently. I can promise you anything. Zhong Luoyue stood up. I can promise you anything that the Zhong family can do. Time. Tu Shini suddenly turned his head and looked at her. At least, you can't promise me time. Time, or the time that has disappeared. Tu Shini nodded. Even if you gather all the wealth in the world, you can't buy back a second that has passed. Zhong Luoyue frowned. Could it be that there's nothing that can move you, Mr. Tu? Yes, we can't do what you want, but I'm afraid no one in the world can do it. Mr. Tu, I hope you can think about it carefully, because I really came with great sincerity. Ouyang Jie hurriedly said, Master, Miss Zhong did come with great sincerity. She came in person and escaped a disaster to reach the manor. Now she's still lying in the hospital. Go ahead. Tu Shini waved his hand indifferently and directly left. Ouyang Jie sat down a little discouraged, but Zhong Luoyue didn't sit down. He didn't see any angry expression on this woman's face, but he didn't know what she was thinking. Ouyang Jie thought for a while and broke the silence. Actually, this is good. Master even rejected me, so it's impossible for him to agree to anyone else. At the very least, we can't get it, and no one else wants to get it. Except for my master. I'm confident that no one can beat me. Zhong Luoyue suddenly said, Didn't you lose to a layman not long ago? Ouyang Jie was taken aback, then smiled bitterly and said, That time we gambled on luck, and there was no skill involved. I lost, and it can only be said that my luck wasn't as good as his. It wasn't a problem with my skills. Zhong Luoyue didn't comment, and looked at an oil painting hanging on the wall of the study. In the oil painting, a woman hugged a white fluffy cat and sat quietly on the edge of the window. Zhong Luoyue couldn't help but exclaim, What a beautiful woman! Who is she? Karen. Ouyang Jie also looked at the oil painting and seemed to be lost in his memories. Finally, he said, Her name is Karen. I don't know her specific name, because even this name was heard from my master's mouth. I only knew it when he occasionally said this name when he was drunk. She is your master's wife? Zhong Luoyue said seriously. Ouyang Jie shook his head. My master has always been single, and everyone in the manor knows it. Even Lady Eve can only be said to be my master's confidant. I feel that Lady Eve is a little interested in my master, but it may just be because of Lady Eve's natural disposition. So, you haven't seen this woman named Karen? Zhong Luoyue nodded. Ouyang Jie blinked and asked somewhat rascally, I used to look at this oil painting every day. Doesn't that count as seeing it? But Zhong Luoyue didn't roll her eyes at him, which disappointed Ouyang Jie. She just said, Let's go. Ouyang Jie was startled, and 2 fingers passed in front of Zhong Luoyue's eyes. You mean we're going back now? No, it's rare to come here. Although your master hasn't agreed yet, at least we can see the legendary Daylily series. Zhong Luoyue took out a crystal ball with numbers embedded in it from her pocket and looked at it. Didn't they say that a lucky person will be born? Yes, you like drinking red wine. Ouyang Jie smiled and then bent his arm. Then let's go. Zhong Luoyue finally rolled her eyes at him. Perhaps for young talents, coming here would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Even those young and beautiful girls were a rare platform for him. But Luochio didn't like to socialize, except for his guests. Therefore, he didn't take the initiative to contact anyone in this most suitable place for communication. Then, it seemed that the only way to pass the time was to appreciate the various decorations in the manor or the oil paintings hanging on the wall. For example, Luochio stopped in front of an oil painting at this time. The oil painting hanging on the wall was very large, depicting a male aristocrat. Looking at the blurriness of the painting, it seemed to have some history. Ganhong didn't know why Master Chiu could be so entranced by this painting. She felt that such a portrait was very ordinary. As a human, it was more because she learned all kinds of useful skills that could bring her survival skills. Appreciating oil paintings was a complete waste of time for the children in the village. His name is Baron Fernandez. At this time, a young man walked slowly from behind. Hearing this, Luochio turned around to take a look. This young man was very handsome. His hands were casually inserted into the pockets of his trousers, and a cynical smile hung on his face. Blonde hair and blue eyes, with a pair of beautiful eyes. Baron Fernandez? Luaccio repeated this name. The handsome man walked to Luaccio's side, raised his head, and looked at the portrait hanging on the wall. He nodded and said, "He is the original owner of this manor. Of course, I'm talking about 200 years ago." Luaccio nodded and looked at the portrait of Baron Fernandez again. At this time, the handsome young man suddenly said, "There is actually a legend about this Baron Fernandez." Saying this, the handsome man suddenly looked at Luaccio. Legend has it that this Baron Fernandez is a monster that lives on blood. Lives on blood. Luaccio pondered for a moment and said, "Generally speaking, people tend to imagine such people as vampires." "Yes." The handsome man smiled charmingly. "That's generally what people think, but the rumors haven't been proven. But one thing is true, and that is that this Baron Fernandez can't come in contact with the sun. Once the sun shines on his skin, he will feel pain. This is something that everyone in Baron Fernandez's family knows. They kept this secret, but for some reason, this secret was eventually found out by outsiders. You know, people's fear of the unknown can sometimes destroy a lot of things." "What happened to this Baron Fernandez later?" Luaccio asked curiously. The handsome man turned to look out the window, then stretched out his finger and pointed at a tall tower in the castle, saying, "That's the tallest building in the East Wing." At that time, Baron Fernandez was hung on that tower by the people of his territory, exposed to the direct sunlight. I heard that he wailed in pain for a whole day and finally died. Luaccio glanced at it. If that was the tallest tower in the east, then opposite it was the tower in the west. It seemed to be the residence that Lady Eve once mentioned. The handsome man walked in front of Luaccio, slightly taller than Luaccio. "What? You don't believe it?" Luaccio didn't deny it, but asked instead, "Do you believe it?" The handsome man came closer and whispered, "I believe it, and I believe that you also believe it." "Why?" Chapter 873. Or it's almost inaudible. The handsome man added softly, "A normal adult male's heartbeat should be 60 to 100 beats per minute. Don't you think yours is a little less? Once or twice?" Luaccio glanced at him, then suddenly looked at Gan Hong. "Can you give me a glass of water?" "Okay." Gan Hong nodded quickly. Although it was strange, she still obeyed obediently. The handsome man watched Gan Hong leave, then said, "It seems that this beautiful lady doesn't know anything." "For now," Luaccio answered casually. "Maybe there will be a chance in the future. My name is Haidazir. Nice to meet you, Mr. Non-Human." Haidazir stretched out his hand at this time. "Luaccio." Luaccio lightly shook the other party's hand. As the club's boss for Luaccio, who did not like to interact with too many people before, the last thing he was afraid of now was shaking hands with people. "So, you may be the same kind of person as Baron Fernandez. To be exact, we are from the same family." Haidazir said seriously, "My surname is Fernandez, the descendant of the castle's owner. But the current owner of this castle is Mr. Two." Luaccio seemed to be more interested. "Ever since my ancestor, Baron Fernandez, died, this castle has been left empty," said Hidasil slowly. "But I've never seen anything like this before. In modern times, it was included in the state's property and was finally bought by Tushini." "You are taking the initiative to approach me?" Luaccio asked. Haidazir said very naturally, "Like the scene before that caused the treasure ball to produce a magnificent scene, I think it's quite difficult to not notice you. The person holding the so-called treasure ball, we call him Long Zay, is a fraud master, good at using mental power to hypnotize others. Deceiving people is his hobby. You've ruined his good deed, so you'd better be careful. I can't watch my companions be bewitched either." Luaccio shook his head. Perhaps before the holidays, he would not do it and would only watch silently. But if he had a thought in his mind, he would do it without hesitation. He would feel his thoughts at every moment. "No matter what, I've already warned you." Hidasil shrugged and then sighed. "You don't look like a vampire. What kind of non-human are you?" "I don't know either." Luaccio shook his head. "This may be the answer that I need to work hard to find in the future." Hidasil did not mind such an answer. He just nodded in agreement. The world is a big place. There are many who don't know why they are extraordinary. Some people are born with it, while others are born with it. It is also possible that they are the descendants of a race that disappeared in history, but they do not know about it. There are even people who live forever because of the fountain of undying. There are also people who live by blood. Luochio looked at Citasil and said, "Were you invited by Tushini or something else?" Citasil asked curiously. "I can't help but be curious. Because among the people who were invited this time, you are the only one I don't know. As for the other guys, we know each other very well. So I'm very curious. What is your purpose in coming here?" "It's just a coincidence." Luochio told the truth. He was indeed pulled here by Song Ying. Of course, it was also Father Song's intention. Although after arriving at the manor, he found that it was not as simple as he thought it would be. Luochio, who had long been used to encountering strange things, had long learned to adapt to the situation. "I'll believe you for now." Citasil looked at Luochio again and then smiled. "You are very mysterious. You always have an ability to make people believe, or should I say, charm? I hope I won't disturb you," Luochio said with a harmless expression. "Perhaps it's best to leave now." Luochio glanced at Song Ying, who was not far away and was once again caught in the trouble of socializing. He could only shake his head at Citasil. Citasil had a look of pity and seemed to be helpless. Finally, he said, "At least, I hope you can stay by my side. Of course, this does not mean that I need to monitor you. It's just that if you are by my side, they will not be hostile to you for no reason." Following who is not the same as following? Luochio readily agreed. Moreover, Citasil seemed to be a person who liked to tell stories. Luochio was a person who liked to listen to stories, so why not? Citasil smiled with satisfaction. "You seem to rarely show yourself. Rarely come into contact with our world." Luochio looked at him, puzzled. Citasil said, "Non-humans hide in human society and have many things to worry about. In this world, there are always those who claim to be righteous or those who have inherited ancient traditions who like to hunt non-humans. When you walk outside, it's best to disguise yourself. For example, keep your heartbeat in the range of a normal person as much as possible." "For example?" Luochio blinked. Citasil said very warmly, "Oh, Luochio, my new friend, I am happy to give you more reminders so that you can better walk in this dangerous world. Come, let me teach you some life skills as a non-human. Let me tell you." Citasil very naturally put his hand on Luochio's shoulder. He was really a very warm-hearted person. In the distance, Song Ying, who had just escaped the siege of a group of old men, happened to run into Gan Hong, who was walking back with a cup of water. She shouted, "Gan Hong, who is that person? She seems to have a very good relationship with that guy." Gan Hong instantly recognized the difference between this Miss Song Ying and that guy. She found it funny that Song Ying's mouth was so blunt. However, she still quickly replied, "I don't know." She took the initiative to get to know him. It seems they have already chatted. Song Ying looked at him suspiciously. She felt that this man with blonde hair and blue eyes was really worthy of the word handsome. In some popular terms, he was the so-called beauty of the age. As for Luochio was just so. "I say, Gan Hong." Song Ying suddenly stared at Gan Hong seriously. "My grandfather gave you to Luochio. I know what he meant. I also know very well what you learned in the village. I am very curious. Have you not attacked in the past few days?" Being asked, Gan Hong felt somewhat embarrassed. Actually, she had attacked before this young Master Luochio came to my humble abode. Gan Hong could only mumble, "Master Chiu is more decent." Song Ying was stunned. She recalled the behavior of the Luochio she knew. At this time, she frowned as she looked at Luochio and the blonde handsome man chatting happily. She could not help but mutter, "This guy, could he be gay?" Song Ying felt that this thought was very scary. However, the more she thought about it, the more she felt it was possible. Otherwise, which man would not touch a beauty like Gan Hong? Also, the last time she drove in the middle of the night, this guy actually sat beside her and waited for more than 2 hours. He was even folding paper cranes. What a sissy. While Elisabeth and Amance did not directly enter the banquet hall where the guests were. Instead, they stayed in another quiet room. While Elisabeth's appearance was quite special. It was easy to attract the attention of others. Obviously, whether it was her or the old man Amonst, they were not happy to see this scene. Amonst looked very old and abnormally thin, as if he was withered. From time to time, he would cough twice. He was looking at his pocket watch, silently calculating the time. Suddenly, the door of the room opened. It was Lady Eve who came in. After taking a bath and changing clothes, Lady Eve had a faint floral fragrance on her body. Lady Eve smiled and looked at Elizabeth and Amonst in the room. She nodded politely. "Long time no see, Mr. Amonst. How are you?" "Thank you for your concern," Amonst replied coldly. Lady Eve came with a small, exquisite box and a small folding fan in her hand. She walked to the sofa and sat down. She opened the folding fan and fanned herself leisurely. Lady Eve suddenly opened her small mouth and exhaled softly, while Elizabeth, who was sitting opposite her, was suddenly shocked. A red light flashed in her eyes, and her expression suddenly became somewhat uncomfortable. She hugged the wooden box with both hands and tightened her grip. "Lady Eve, bullying a junior. Is this how a noble should behave?" Amonst looked at Lady Eve coldly. "You know that this child has never sucked blood before. Why are you using the smell of blood to stimulate her?" Lady Eve closed her folding fan and covered her mouth. "Is that so? After so many years, why Elizabeth is still so pure? It's really moving." Almond snorted coldly at this time, gently knocking the long black umbrella on the floor. The old man did not stop Madame Eve, but just stared straight ahead and said coldly, "I once made a vow. Anyone who wants to hurt this child, no matter who it is, I will not let them go. I'm so scared, so scared." Lady Eve patted her chest. "Mr. Amonst, one of the descendants of the great 12 holy knights of the Round Table. But, at such an old age, how long can you protect this child?" Amonst was obviously also a strong talker. He sneered and his murky eyes suddenly burst out with a ruthless look. "I only need one sword to kill a vampire after the 10th generation." With a flick of his wrist, the bright silver blade instantly shot out from the black umbrella. The reflected silver light directly pierced Lady Eve's eyes. Lady Eve dodged the light in fear and then smiled. It was a very pleasant conversation. "Grandpa, I'm fine now." While Elizabeth's face looked better now, and she said softly. Amonst then put the blade back into the umbrella and did not look at Lady Eve anymore. Not long after, the door was opened again. This time, it was Tushini who walked in. He looked around the room and said, "Only the two of you?" Elizabeth said, "Mr. Tu, I met Mr. Longza. He must have arrived long ago, but he hasn't come yet." "Why, Elizabeth?" When Tushini saw why Elizabeth, a smile appeared on his face, and he praised, "You're still so beautiful." Why Elizabeth lowered her head, looking a little shy. After that, Tushini also greeted Amonst, and the old man was obviously more polite to Tushini, but not very friendly. Not long after, even before Tushini sat down, Mr. Longza, who was carrying an old leather bag, slowly pushed open the door and walked in. He also looked at the people present and smiled. Looks like I'm not the last one here." Tushini said at this time, "Longza, I heard that you caused a small commotion in the banquet hall." Mr. Longza laughed. "Old friend, you know what I'm interested in. Besides, from the results, I didn't cause any trouble, did I? Besides, if you want to say that I'm not a good friend, old friend, I think you're the one who's not being nice enough, right? It seems that other than us, you also invited some other people here." Lady Eve also looked at Tushini at the same time and asked softly, "What's the background of that young man?" Tushini said indifferently, "I heard that he came with the eldest daughter of the Song Dynasty group." I probably know the purpose of this songing. It's nothing more than inviting me to come back and take charge of the Song family's casino." "Then what about the young guy in the vineyard? What's his background?" Lady Eve asked again. Tushini shook his head. "I don't know. He's indeed a little mysterious, but I don't feel any malice from him, and he doesn't seem like someone who would cause trouble." Lady Eve narrowed her eyes. "These behemoths at the top of the human aristocratic families, even we have to avoid them. It's rumored that the Song family has a private army comparable to the regular army, and they're not to be trifled with. Now there's one more unknown." "Tushini, I thought you didn't plan to change the date? The hunting day is our tradition. If we change the date, it'll tarnish our honor. Mr. Ryuzawa laughed at this time. It seems that the person you met and I met is the same person. One thing is for sure, he's not the same kind as us, and definitely not from our sworn enemy, the werewolves. Speaking of which, I haven't drunk non-human blood for a long time. I wonder what it tastes like. Unexpectedly, Amantz, who was sitting at this time, suddenly sneered, "Humph, how interesting. A group of guys who can't even walk for a few hours under the sun and only know how to hide in the corner to play tricks, talking about how powerful they are. What honor. They're just rats in the sewers." Mr. Ryuzawa was not angry, but he sneered back, "I wonder which paladin is now serving these rats in the sewers. Elizabeth is different from you." Amantz stared coldly at Takizawa. Mr. Ryuzawa and Amantz seemed to be at loggerheads as soon as they met, and both sides seemed to be at loggerheads. Seeing this, Lady Eve suddenly said, "You guys, has anyone seen Hydasir? It's already past the agreed time. Why hasn't he gathered yet?" Tushini said, "He has already arrived. Don't worry about him. He will naturally appear after the start." Lady Eve nodded, and Mr. Ryuzawa shrugged and said, "That guy probably has a new boy toy in mind. There are a few beautiful young men today. They should be to Hydasir's liking." Amantz said, "Lady Eve, Mr. Ryuzawa, Hydasir, Elizabeth, and you, Tushini, there's only one left. That woman, is she not coming today? The woman who will bring you eternal life, Karen." Tushini said indifferently, "It's the same whether she comes or not. Let's go." Yin 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 yin. Chapter 874. The manor was basically the same as it was before. There was a tall tower on the east and west side of the manor. At this time, Kim was walking on the spiral stone stairs that led to the top of the west tower. The top floor of the tower was where Lady Eve lived. Kim was very tall and had the image of a Shandong man. He soon arrived at the door of Lady Eve's room. He didn't immediately go in or knock on the door. He just waited in front of the door for a while. His hearing was actually very good. As a gambler, he was once known as the gambling demon. Naturally, he had undergone special hearing training. In fact, Kim believed that his hearing was absolutely top-notch, and his gambling skills were also at the peak. But many years ago, he finally lost to Tushini. In the end, he cut off one of his fingers and became a butler of Tushini's manor. He knew that he would never be able to win against Tushini, because it was impossible for an ordinary person to win against him, even if the ordinary person had reached the limit. There was still no movement in the room. Only then did Uncle Gene take out a key and open the door. He didn't stay in the room, but went straight to the bathroom. There was still some mist left on the mirror, making it hazy. The residual humidity and heat in the bathroom would make people feel a little uncomfortable on a hot day. Uncle Gene was already sweating a lot as he climbed the stairs of the tower. He frowned and looked at the bathtub full of rose petals. At this time, there was a woman lying in the bathtub. Her name was Bela. Kim remembered this name because Bela was originally a maid in the manor. Later, Lady Eve took a fancy to her, and from then on, she followed Lady Eve. In fact, over the years, Lady Eve came to the manor many times as a guest. Every time, she would choose a young girl to be her attendant. Kim walked into the bathtub. The rose petals almost covered the surface of the bathtub, like a red carpet for Bela. She just stuck her head out, closed her eyes, and had a dreamy smile on her face. There were 2 small holes on her neck. Bela was motionless. Kim put his finger on Bela's neck and then shook his head. Kim directly reached into the water and carried Bela out of the bathtub. The moment she got up, her body was still warm from the water. She didn't look like a dead person at all. Her skin was still so warm and soft. Maybe she just fell asleep. Another one. Butler Kim covered Bella's body with a white bedsheet and left with her in his arms. For so many years, he had dealt with this kind of thing 2 or 3 times a year. He had long gone from being shocked at the beginning to not being surprised at all. In truth, he was waiting for a chance to turn himself into them. Generally, we all call them as exorcists. There was no doubt that Hiddesil was a talkative gentleman, at least so far. Luaccio didn't find anything wrong with Hiddesil from his appearance and behavior. Of course, it was limited to the current preliminary contact, because they were talking about some non-human issues. After Gan Hong came back with water, she was sent away by Luochio again. This time, she wanted to get some snacks. Luochio was raised by Miss Maid of the club and had the habit of having afternoon tea every day. So Gan Hong was very busy. Exorcists. Luochio drank a mouthful of water. Hidesil gave him a personal feeling that his physical ability was stronger than ordinary people. In addition, he should have some special racial abilities. Luochio had come into contact with non-human creatures that sucked blood. For example, the princess of the Xinyuan family. Of course, in terms of the power of the inhuman domain, Haidasir and Su Zijuan really couldn't be compared. The gap between the two was like the difference between an ancient king and a pauper, because Citisil was probably a vampire 10 generations later. The power of the vampire 10 generations later wasn't strong. Although they could maintain their youth, they were actually very fragile. Even so, if the source of the vampire was traced, the power of the first generation and the first generation was also quite strong. Of course, when Luochio made friends with someone or was interested in some species, he wouldn't simply use strength as the only criterion. Because after tearing open the shell of great power, Luochio had another criterion for what was shining inside. Hidesil nodded at this time. Yes, exorcists or exorcists. They were first active in the Middle Ages. At that time, there were many legends of demons all over the world. The most common ones were the legends of vampires, werewolves, and the so-called evil witches. These should be familiar to him. But in fact, these three races are rarely exposed. So, exorcists are mostly exorcising evil spirits, those who have lost their consciousness, or those who have merged due to resentment, are uncontrollable. It is very difficult to unify and manage them. Luochio nodded. Exorcists have their own organizations, right? Yes. Hidesil nodded. Generally speaking, there's a very loose exorcist association. Its existence is not to rule, but to provide information for exorcists. Of course, it is also a platform for exorcists to communicate with each other. In addition, within the circle of exorcists, there are several particularly large organizations that non-humans like us need to be careful of. For example, the Holy Cross Army. Holy Cross sounds like the Holy See. Yes. Hidesil smiled. During the Middle Ages, the church had a period of hunting witches. The witches here generally refer to witches. During that time, many newborn witches were unable to resist the Holy Cross Army and were either captured or burned to death. Next is the Knights of the Round Table. At this moment, Haidasir dipped his finger in some clear water and drew a circle on the table. Circle symbolizes unity of one heart. In its heyday, the Knights of the Round Table had more than 150 knights. The most famous ones were, of course, the legend of King Arthur's 12 Holy Knights. But in fact, the Knights of the Round Table not only had powerful knights, but also the great wizard Merlin and his descendants. Then there is the Magician Association. Hidesil said seriously. But in many cases, magic and witchcraft can be distinguished. This provides a very good cover for witches and wizards. So, exactly how many witches and wizards are hidden in the Magician Association is a matter of unknown. On one hand, the magicians will also take on some tasks of exorcism. On the other hand, there are also wizards and some rare races. So, it is very difficult to determine the nature of the Magician Association. Luochio nodded. Although he had the ability to obtain information at will, in fact, many things were obtained for free, which was very pleasing. In fact, there is a special channel for obtaining information about the non-human world. Hidesil looked around and suddenly stretched his hand under the table. The moment he opened his palm, a furry basketball slowly emerged from the center of his palm. This furry fellow had a pair of wings and a small tail on its back. In addition, almost half of its body was a huge eye. Hidesil said, "We call it a messenger." It was originally a very rare sprite. Later, it was cultivated with brand new technology and has reached the stage where it can reproduce in large numbers. The advantage of a messenger is that it can update the non-human world situation in real time. You can think of it as a newspaper. The blue messenger opened its eyes at this time, completely revealing a huge ball. However, it did not look scary and was even somewhat cute. A faint light projected from the eyeball, and a panel appeared. It looked like the interface of a newspaper or magazine. There were words and pictures, and even the words had the option to select multiple languages. It was a little simple to call a newspaper, but it was more like a website. Interestingly, the pictures on the screen were even moving. Good technology. Luaccio tried to touch the interface projected by the elf messenger with his finger and found that it was indeed controllable. Hidasil smiled at this time and said, "In fact, these messengers are just child bodies. Above them, there are messengers that are the mother bodies. Each mother body can manage hundreds of thousands of child bodies, and the many mother bodies combine to form a huge processing terminal. As long as someone writes what happens to the mother body, then we who hold the child bodies can pay attention to the situation in the non-human world at any time. By the way, this kind of mind thing is a product of the Magician Association." Luochio was like a child who had gotten a new toy. He couldn't stop his hand as he stroked. Hidasil opened his mouth slightly at this time, and his eyes fell on Luochio's neck. He suddenly said, "My friend, this messenger is for you as a gift for our acquaintance." "For me?" Luochio was a little surprised. Hidasil said generously, "This messenger is not something rare, but it is hard to find without a special purchase channel. But I don't lack this thing. Then I'll buy it." Luochio thought for a moment. "What should I pay for this? I mean, do you have a special currency? Wealth means nothing to us. Except for some guys who have a special interest in wealth, it is actually useless." Hidasil shook his head and said, "Generally speaking, we are popular in barter. Of course, this messenger can be bought with money, because the Magician Association also needs a lot of daily expenses. But I said it's for you, so it's for you. Do you know why I don't lack this thing? You can't be its developer." Luochio joked. Hidasil smiled. "I don't have the knowledge to develop this kind of thing, but I'm one of the agents of the messenger." "Agent? That is to say, he is also a businessman?" Luochio thought for a while, then reached out and took out a black card from his pocket. The card was printed with 3 golden marks. "I don't have the habit of taking things for free. Since you're used to barter, then I will use this card to exchange. This card can..." Before Luochio finished speaking, Hidasil picked up the black card with a look of surprise. "This is the mark on it. It can't be wrong. This is the Onyx Soul discount card. You... Oh, my friend, Luochio, how can you have such a precious thing? Do you know that an Onyx Soul discount card with only 1 mark can be sold at the price of 5 kilograms of mithril or the same value on the black market? Not to mention, this is a 3-mark one." Luochio blinked. This is indeed a discount card. But what the hell is the price of 5 kilograms of mithril on the black market? Do you not know the preciousness of this Onyx Soul discount card? Hidasil asked curiously. At the same time, he pushed the black card back to Luochio. However, his movements were somewhat slow, and there was a look of reluctance in his eyes. Luochio shook his head. "Whether it is precious or not is hard to say. However, this thing is of no use to me. That is probably because you don't know how precious it is." Hidasil said, "According to legend, there is a mysterious place in this world. No matter who it is, as long as they step into this place, they can buy anything and fulfill any wish. Of course, the premise is that they must pay a price. This Onyx Soul discount card is one that passes. There were 2 marks on the card representing a 10% discount, a 20% discount, and even a 30% discount. Do you know how precious an opportunity it is for a person who wants to fulfill a certain wish to pay a lower price than the original price?" After saying that, Hidasil suddenly shook his head. "However, this mysterious place in legend has disappeared from the West for nearly 100 years. It is said that 100 years ago, the non-humans of the entire Western world besieged it because of a certain matter. After that, the Western non-human world went from a glorious era to a bleak one. It was as though gold had turned into scrap iron. Only after 100 years did it regain some vitality. However, there are also some who say that it did not disappear. It is just quietly waiting for the day when it will reappear. Thus, it was able to fetch a terrifyingly high price on the black market. Additionally, this thing is a consumable item, making it even more precious. How did I expect you to have one? Should I say that I am the boss of that place you mentioned? Forget it. If we meet again, I will just wear a mask. That way it will not be awkward. Luaccio was someone who was afraid of being awkward. I do not have any wishes that I want to fulfill. Luaccio smiled and said, I obtained this thing by accident. It is just that the material is somewhat strange. That is why I kept it. Hitasil, thank you for sending me a messenger. Take this as my return gift. Oh, Luaccio, my good friend. Hitasil became even more enthusiastic. You are such a generous person. I feel very honored. Today is a wonderful day to be able to meet you. He grabbed Luaccio's hand with both hands and said with incomparable sincerity, This guy is so enthusiastic. Luaccio gently pulled back his hand. He was not used to such intimate contact with a man. Hitasil did not mind at the moment. However, as he quickly accepted the black card, he also took out a few rings. This Onyx Soul discount card is too precious. An ordinary messenger is simply not worth it. Then, Haitasir slowly said, These rings are for you and your companions. Luaccio looked at these rings. There were a total of 4. 3 were red and 1 was green. There seemed to be some other meaning. Chapter 875. What's the special purpose of this ring? Luaccio picked up one of the red rings and looked at it. He heard Citasil say seriously at this time, My friend, you gave me such a precious thing. Such a precious friendship makes me feel shocked. So I decided to confess some things to you, so that we can be honest with each other. Luaccio made an expression of listening to the rest of the story. Citasil said seriously at this time, Do you know that for us, there is a tradition of hunting day, a festival? Luaccio thought for a moment. Something like that. Citasil nodded. For us, hunting day is equivalent to a banquet. We usually restrain ourselves very much, but the impulses hidden in our bodies, if we suppress them for a long time without releasing them, will easily make us lose our way. Once we lose our way, we will lose our reason. In fact, in the many vampire legends that circulate in the world, most of them are lost vampires. Because they are unable to control themselves well, they will bring a fatal disaster to themselves. So this hunting day, Luaccio's heart stirred. Today is the hunting day, and the guests here are the prey? Citasil nodded. They won't know afterwards, because we have a way to erase this part of their memory. Remember Longzay? He specializes in dealing with the aftermath. His deception can deceive the memories of most different people. So the wine tasting party is just a cover. Luaccio looked around. Citasil said, We need an environment where we can fully release our instincts. The taste of the blood of these pampered people is very good, rich in nutrients, and can bring us more vitality in the opening ceremony of hunting day. My friend, wear these rings. It can prevent you from being targeted by my companions. They are my personal mark. If you wear them, my companions will know that you are my guests. So naturally, they will not do anything to you. Why are there 2 colors? Luaccio asked curiously. Why would there be men and women? Citasil asked in disdain. All right. Luaccio did not ask any more questions about the ring, but he obviously did not believe in the past so easily. Under Haitasir's eager gaze, Luaccio put on the only green ring. After putting on the ring, Luaccio did not feel anything wrong with it. Apart from having a little bit of Citasil's aura, this ring was actually just an ornament. Truth be told, if you could have taken your friend away when I was persuading you, you might have been able to avoid a panicked experience. But from the looks of it now, perhaps it's already too late. If we leave now, even I would find it difficult to bear the dissatisfaction of my companions. Luaccio smiled. Don't I already have your ring? Yes. Haitasir smiled, picked up the glass of champagne in his hand, and gently touched Luaccio's glass. My dear friend, he's still a little too enthusiastic. Luaccio felt that something was wrong. I hope your companions, those beautiful ladies, will not panic too much. Haitasir leaned back in his chair and swirled the champagne glass. Originally, it would not take long for the guests here to be in a strange state. But later, you asked someone to open the window, so it's hard to say. I think the fragrance of these flowers is a little too strong. Luaccio shook his head. Idasir said, "These flowers are specially sent to the scene. They are a variant of the Dachira flower. The smell of the flowers can produce a hypnotic effect, causing people to fall into an illusion. After that, with Long's personal ability, he can easily erase some unpleasant things. You don't know this and feel that these flowers are strange. Asking people to open the window, there's nothing to say." Idasir said indifferently, "In fact, maybe this is better. If the guests are more awake, they will feel fear, despair, and so on. With these reactions, it should be able to stimulate some fellows to become more impulsive. Only it will be more troublesome to deal with after that. And, generally speaking, it is not a big deal." Suddenly, the sound of a bell ringing could be heard. It was not loud, but it was enough for everyone present to hear it clearly. Everyone turned to look and saw that it was the manor's housekeeper, Uncle Kim. Uncle Kim was holding a bell in his hand and a small hammer. He looked around and said in a clear voice, "Dear guests, the last batch of wine for this year will be opened soon. Please follow me." The door opened, and several of the manor's servants were ready to guide the many guests. Idasir stood up and bent down. His hand gently pressed down on Luaccio's shoulder. His lips were almost touching as he whispered, "I also need to go make some preparations. Remember to ask your friend to put on the ring. Also, remember not to run around. Once it starts, there will be people in charge of inspection in the castle." Luaccio nodded, and Idasir drifted away. "What are you talking about? What is the background of that person?" Song Ying walked up to Luaccio. Beside her were Gan Hong and the female secretary, Su Mei. Hearing that, Luaccio casually said, "Actually, it's nothing. We just talked about some anecdotes. This gentleman is quite enthusiastic and talkative." Song Ying stared at Luaccio suspiciously. In fact, she had wanted to get between the two men for a long time. However, Song Ying was someone who knew how to look at the situation. It was not good to suddenly disturb them. Although it was her father who asked her to bring Luaccio here, she still had some grudges in her heart. She could not ignore it. "Is that really all?" Song Ying clearly did not believe it so easily. Luaccio suddenly said, "By the way, when do you plan to meet Tu Shini?" Song Ying said with a helpless expression, "It's all because of you. You clearly have a great opportunity. Forget it. I have asked. Tu Shini is not seeing any guests now. I have been rejected at the door a long time ago. I will see if there is a chance to talk after the banquet starts. If there is no other way, I will wait for the people here to disperse before visiting him." With that, Song Ying suddenly frowned. "I just didn't expect that woman, Zhong Luoyue, to be here too. She even brought Ouyang Jie with her. He is the last disciple of Tu Shini. I am afraid that it will be much more difficult to persuade Tu Shini than imagined. By the way, since you have met Tu Shini, at least you have an impression of him. What kind of person do you think he is? He should be a wise elder." Luaccio thought for a while, but his eyes suddenly looked towards the window. This distraction was easily noticed by Song Ying. She followed Luaccio's gaze and found that Luaccio was just looking at the vase by the window. The flowers on the vase should have just been planted. They were very bright, but Song Ying was obviously not interested. "Let's talk about serious matters. Don't be distracted. What's so good about these flowers?" "There's a butterfly." Gan Hong's eyesight was much better. At this time, she reminded in a low voice, it probably flew in from outside after the window was opened. It seemed that the sound of talking had disturbed the butterfly. It suddenly flew out of the petals and flew towards the window. But because of this, Song Ying could see its appearance clearly. Its whole body was purple-blue, and it had a metallic luster. Song Ying glanced at it and said angrily, "Isn't it just a blue flash butterfly? Nothing special." Luaccio said, "It is not a blue flash butterfly, but a Helena flash butterfly. Although they are both blue, they are of different breeds. You see, there's a circle of light white lines on its body, like a beautiful halo. When flying, the Helena flash butterfly's body is graceful and graceful, like a goddess flying under the blue sky. So the Helena flash butterfly is also called Flash Butterfly, the goddess of light." "Mr. Luo, you are really amazing. You know so many things." Su Mei listened and couldn't help but praise. But she seemed to have ignored Song Ying's existence. However, after saying this sentence, Su Mei regretted it, because Song Ying was glaring at her at this time. Actually, I read it in books. Luochio said indifferently. It's the first time I see the real thing. I'm asking you about Tu Shini, don't interrupt. When Song Ying was fierce, she actually had breasts. She puffed out her chest high, like a female leopard running on the grassland. Luochio suddenly smiled and said, Then I will take you to see Mr. Tuesday, you? Now. Song Ying looked surprised. Luochio smiled but didn't say anything. He walked straight to a side door of the banquet hall. Song Ying glanced at Gan Hong and saw that she was also puzzled at this time, so she had to quickly follow. Everyone, please follow the footsteps of the servants and try to keep quiet and order. In front of the entrance to the cellar, Uncle Kim reminded all the guests, and the guests also walked slowly and obediently, without any signs of rushing in. Ajay, come here. But this time, Uncle Kim suddenly called Ajay over. He and Zhong Luoyue were actually in the banquet hall. At this time, he glanced at Zhong Luoyue and took her to Uncle Kim. Uncle Kim, what's the matter? Uncle Kim said at this time, Ajay, your master is looking for you. Don't go in first, go to the study and wait for him. Now, Ajay was stunned and then puzzled. I just met my master in the study. What can happen? Uncle Kim shook his head and said, I don't know. This is what your master asked me to pass on to you. Go and take a look. Ouyang Jie hesitated and glanced at Zhong Luoyue. Zhong Luoyue said indifferently, You go, I can go down first. Well, I'll be back soon. Ouyang Jie nodded. After greeting Uncle Kim, he quickly walked against the crowd. I hope you have a good time. Uncle Kim smiled at Zhong Luoyue, a very loud smile. Zhong Luoyue nodded and followed the crowd down the stairs to the cellar. Song Ying felt that Luochio said that he would take her to see Tu Shini was probably not reliable, because along the way, the four of them had come to a deserted corridor, which was not the way to the cellar at all. Luochio even casually opened the doors of different rooms in the corridor. Like a customer who didn't choose what he liked, he directly left. Finally, when Luochio opened the fourth door, Song Ying couldn't help but ask, Are you done? Here it is. Luochio nodded at this time and went directly into the room and asked Song Ying and the others to go in together. This room was decorated like a living room, spacious and bright, and there was a very comfortable sofa. Luochio looked at the three of them and said, Sit down first, just wait for a while. Will Tu Shini really come? Song Ying frowned, but seeing that Luochio had already sat down first, she was unwilling in her heart, but had to sit down obediently. Luochio took out the tea set on the table and began to make black tea. Not long after, he poured a cup of fragrant black tea for Gan Hong, Song Ying, and Su Mei. The banquet is about to start. I'm not in the mood to drink this. What's your purpose in bringing me here? Song Ying was already impatient. She looked at the time. Are you lying to me? What are you planning to do? To moisten my throat. Luochio said softly, I'll tell you. I'm not drinking. Song Ying snorted coldly. Luochio just looked at her, which made Song Ying irritated, and she had an impulse to beat him up. She was so angry that she directly picked up the teacup, drank half of it, and then threw it back. I've drunk, say it. Seeing that Gan Hong and Su Mei had also drunk, Luochio said slowly, Because it should be safer here. Safer? What do you mean? Song Ying frowned. Suddenly, she felt her head becoming somewhat heavy. She subconsciously shook her head, wanting to sober up. However, it only took a moment for her to fall onto the sofa. Truth be told, the first to fall was Su Mei and the last to fall was Gan Hong. Only a moment had passed between them. Luochio waved his hand, allowing them to lie comfortably on the sofa. Then, he opened the room's windows so that the room would not feel stuffy. After that, he closed the door. Hydasil had said that by having them wear the rings, they could avoid any bad things. But in Luochio's opinion, the better way was to leave them here. As the holidays grew longer, Luochio gradually felt his emotions recovering. Gradually, he began acting like how he was in the past, avoiding as much trouble as possible. He would bring a group of women to clear instance dungeons for no reason. After closing the door, Luochio gently nodded at the door. A light pattern rippled in front of the door, and the whole room was completely swept by this rippling wave. It's safe enough. Have a good rest. In any case, you stayed up all night to read the documents. Suddenly, a blue butterfly flew in through the corridor window and finally landed on Luacio's shoulder. Luacio stretched out his hand, and the butterfly flew onto his finger. "Are you going to follow me down to the cellar?" Luacio suddenly asked. The blue butterfly suddenly flew up and landed on Luacio's shoulder. "Then, follow me." Luacio smiled. When Luacio arrived at the cellar entrance, Uncle Kim had already begun to close the door. "Am I late?" Luacio said apologetically. Uncle Kim suddenly noticed the green ring on Luacio's finger. He opened his mouth slightly and suddenly said, "Lucky fellow, go in. You should be the last." "Thank you." Yin 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 yin. Chapter 876. Ouyang Jie was playing with a thick poker card, which was the ace of spades. This was something he would do when he was bored. It was already past 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was now 3:07, but Tu Shini still hadn't arrived. The sound of the door opening came at this time. Ouyang Jie stood up at once. "Mas. Uncle Jean." It was Uncle Jean, not Tu Shini. Ouyang Jie sat down helplessly. Uncle Jean came in with a kind smile. "What's wrong? You don't like to see me?" Ouyang Jie shook his head. "How can it be?" He remembered what happened after he was adopted and said with emotion, "Although Master adopted me, he usually didn't see anyone except for teaching me. Otherwise, he would study his vineyard. Uncle Jean, on the other hand, has been taking care of me." Ouyang Jie looked at Uncle Jean and said sincerely, "I don't know who my biological parents are, but I don't feel unfortunate, because I have two fathers later. One is my master. As the saying goes, a teacher for a day is a father for life. Master gave me a new life and made me. The other is you, Uncle Jean. You are like a father to me. You accompanied me when I grew up. Isn't it a waste to use the ability to coax women on me?" Uncle Jean shook his head and walked to the wine cabinet in the study. He picked up a bottle of red wine, poured 2 glasses, and walked over. "If you're not in a hurry, chat with me. Your master will be here in a while." Ouyang Jie didn't suspect anything. He smiled and took the red wine glass from Uncle Jean. They clinked their glasses and then took a sip. Ouyang Jie sighed. "Master's red wine is still the best." Uncle Jean suddenly said at this time, "Ajay, you specially brought Miss Zhong today. Is there any other meaning?" Ajay smiled and said, "What meaning can there be? She's my boss now. She wants to see Master and has given a strict order. It's not good for me to not bring her here, right?" Uncle Jean shook his head slightly. "You won last year's competition. With your achievements, even if you don't work for the Zhong family, all the powerful casinos in the world will fight for you. No one can force you to do something you don't like. You said that I've watched you grow up, and I'm like half a father to you. What's wrong? Even I can't tell the truth?" Ouyang Jie sighed and put down the wine glass. After thinking for a while, he slowly said, "Zhong Luoyue is a very special woman. After seeing her for the first time, I was sure of a few things. Uncle Jean, do you know? It's the feeling of wanting to get something, but not being able to bear to hurt it, and even respecting it." Uncle Jean said indifferently, "Zhong Luoyue is a member of an aristocratic family. The Zhong family can use you because of your talent, but it doesn't mean that the Zhong family is willing to accept you as a real member." Ouyang Jie was silent for a moment, and then said seriously, "Even if I can reach Master's level, I still don't have a chance?" Uncle Jean shook his head and said, "No one can reach your Master's level, whether it's you or me." Ouyang Jie couldn't help but feel dejected. He smiled bitterly and said, "An hour ago, Zhong Luoyue asked my master who would win if she and I had a bet now. To be honest, I didn't have any confidence at that time. On the contrary, Master was calm and composed. To be honest, you're right. I can't reach Master's level now." Uncle Jean didn't comment. Ouyang Jie drank another mouthful of wine to drown his sorrows. "Don't think too much about the future." Uncle Jean comforted Ouyang Jie. "Although she's a woman at the top of an aristocratic family, it's not like you can't reach her." "Thank you, Uncle Jean. You're the only one who's good to me." Ouyang Jie yawned, seeming to be a little tired. He slowly lay on the table, narrowed his eyes, and muttered, "Master, why isn't he here yet?" He looks at me. Very cold, cold. Ouyang Jie completely closed his eyes. Uncle Jean reached out and patted Ouyang Jie's shoulder, saying softly, "Have a good sleep. I'll help you fulfill your wish." Even the top of an aristocratic family can't resist the power of an extraordinary. One day, I'll become an extraordinary, and then, in front of a quiet stone room, Tushini held a brand new white candle in his hand. Behind him were Long Zhe, Elizabeth, and the others. After the stone room opened, Tushini didn't enter immediately. Instead, he let the others enter first. The door was still open because there were still some people who hadn't arrived yet. The interior of the stone room wasn't simple at all. It could even be said to be extremely luxurious, just like a dormitory in mid-world. However, it was unusually dark. Only the candle in Tushini's hand illuminated a small area. In front of a huge round table, there were 7 huge chairs. Tushini put down the candle and took the lead to sit in front of one of the chairs. The others also sat in the other chairs. Tushini looked around, then pressed his hand on the table in front of him. With a light press, a piece of the table was pressed down. It seemed to be a mechanism. At this time, the center of the table began to open. The open mechanism slowly pushed out a long and narrow crystal bottle. Seeing the appearance of the crystal bottle, Lady Eve suddenly closed her folding fan, sat up straight, and whispered, "Forget river." At this moment, Tushini made an inviting gesture. Elizabeth nodded, and a monst, who was standing beside her, took the wooden box from her hand. After opening it, they took out a bottle of red wine that was less than half full. It was a very ordinary glass bottle, but a monst carefully placed it in front of Elizabeth. Red spider lily. Lady Eve also opened the exquisite wooden box she brought and took out the crystal bottle inside. The style was different from Tushini's bottle. She whispered 97. Next was Long Zhe. He opened his bag and took out a cylindrical transparent container. Mr. Long Zhe grabbed the container and waved it in front of the others. After chuckling, he placed it in front of himself. No choice. The Daylily series, Tushini brewed a total of 7 bottles. Including the Daylily, Forget River, placed in the middle of the table, there were already 6 bottles that were known to everyone. As for the last bottle, no one here except Tushini had seen it before. Then, only Yellow Spring and 3 lives are left. Lady Eve smiled. "Looks like I'm not late." The person who came late said, with a frivolous smile. It was Haidasir, but he came empty-handed, which quickly attracted a few gazes. Haidasir pulled out a chair and sat down. "Don't be nervous. I won't break the rules. Here it is." He drew something on the table with his finger. As his finger moved, dark red lines began to appear on the table. Finally, all the lines formed a complete pattern. Not long after, from this pattern, a ball-like creature began to jump out. It looked similar to the messenger, a furry yellow creature. Unlike the messenger, this creature had huge eyes and a big mouth. This yellow ball opened its mouth, revealing dense and sharp teeth. It was spitting out something. Yellow Spring. Haidasir held the object spat out by the ball in his hand. It was a goblet that seemed to be made of gold, but the mouth of the goblet had been sealed. However, the yellow ball spat out something else at this moment. This time, it spat out a box. Haidasir opened the box, which contained a diamond-shaped ruby-like crystal. Haidasir said again, "And the last 3 lives?" "It's really 3 lives." Long Zhe and Lady Eve frowned at the same time. "Why is it in your hands?" Haidasir shrugged and said, "This was sent to me by that woman and asked me to bring it here. As for why she didn't come, I don't know." Long Zhe and the others looked at each other, then looked at Tushini. Lady Eve smiled and said, "No wonder you said it doesn't matter if she comes or not. It seems that you already knew that 3 lives is in Haidasir's hands?" Tushini said indifferently, "I had a correspondence with Haidasir before." Haidasir nodded at this time, proving that Tushini was not lying. Long Zhe had a playful smile at this time. "It's fine if she didn't come on the previous hunting days, but she didn't come today. Tushini, it seems that she really doesn't like you, even if she gave you the embrace." Tushini ignored Long Zhe's words and just said indifferently, Since you've all brought it here, I'll go get ready. Tushini waved his hand, and the various containers placed in front of everyone began to move to the center of the table, then slowly descended and finally disappeared. Start your program. As Tushini spoke, his figure hid in the darkness. In the end, there was no movement. Presumably he had disappeared. Haidasir was the first to stand up at this time. I already have someone I like. You guys take it easy. Longzhe and Lady Eve also got up at this time. Only Elizabeth was still sitting in her original place and did not get up. Elizabeth said timidly, I'll just wait here. Longzhe just whistled and chuckled. My dear Elizabeth, I hope you can get through it this time. Why don't you enjoy this wonderful food with us? After you try it once, you'll feel foolish for persisting. Elizabeth just lowered her head and fiddled with the corner of her clothes, feeling slightly uneasy. At this time, Amon gently pressed Elizabeth's shoulder, then glanced at Longzhe and said indifferently, Get lost. Longzhe shrugged, but he left a step faster than Haidasir. Lady Eve followed behind. After that, Haidasir glanced at Elizabeth and Amon, smiled, then took out a small bottle and threw it at Amon. What's this? Amon frowned. Haidasir said indifferently, The Magician Association's new product this year, a kind of medicine to replenish physical strength. But you'll be very tired after taking it. Mr. Amon, it's up to you. Amon was silent for a while before nodding. Thank you. Haidasir said casually, You're welcome. I'm a dark merchant. One more friend and one more favor is not a bad thing for me. Elizabeth looked at Haidasir gratefully and said softly, May the glory of the true ancestor be with you, Mr. Haidasir. When everyone left, and only Elizabeth and Amon were left, Elizabeth suddenly took a deep breath and pressed her hands on her chest, looking slightly nervous. Amon patted her shoulder gently. As it started, Elizabeth shook her head. Not yet. I'm just a little nervous. Grandpa, if... She looked up and said seriously, If there's an accident, I hope you won't be merciful to me. I won't let anything happen to you. Amon held the long black umbrella tightly. I promise your mother, Rose, that I won't let you get lost. Why, Elizabeth? Because he was the last to enter the passage to the cellar. When Luaccio walked down the long stairs, he could not see the guests in front of him. He could only vaguely hear the voices coming from the front. This so-called cellar seemed to be much more complicated than he imagined. After coming down, he realized how huge it was. There were candlesticks hanging on both sides of the wall, which seemed to be used to guide the guests. But Luaccio was a curious person, so he would take a few glances at the unlit passages. There's nothing there. At this time, Haidasir's voice came from the front. He appeared out of nowhere and was leaning against the wall. He seemed to have been waiting here for a long time. This place doesn't seem to be as simple as a cellar, Luaccio asked casually. At this time, Citizel slowly walked over. This cellar was built by Baron Fernandez. The area is much larger than the castle on the ground. It was originally built for hiding. Hiding the soldiers here is the last resort to deal with the enemy. But interestingly, this place was built like a maze, but before Baron Fernandez was hanged, it was never used even once. Luaccio nodded and looked at a dark mark in the corner. Under the illumination of the candlelight, the mark showed a dark brown color. It was probably blood. And now, it has become your hunting ground? It seems that you're the only one who came down. Haidasir suddenly asked. Luaccio just nodded. Is there a problem? Not really. Haidasir smiled and said, As long as you feel that there is no problem, I believe you should have arranged it. Luaccio returned the remaining 3 rings to Haidasir. Haidasir reached out and took them back. Then, he looked at the butterfly on Luaccio's shoulder that was docilely resting and spreading its wings. He asked curiously, Radiant Goddess, a good breed. Where did it come from? Luaccio glanced sideways and said, It should have flown in from outside. This little guy is quite interesting. After landing on me, it didn't leave. Haidasir stroked his chin and said, I heard that butterflies are like spirits. Every butterfly carries the thoughts of the dead. I don't know if this one has them or not. After saying that, Haidasir reached out to touch the Radiant Goddess Flash butterfly. Unexpectedly, It flew away from Luacio's shoulder and flew into the dim passage. Haidasir said with a regretful expression, "It seems it doesn't like me at all. I'm sorry, I scared your little pet away." Luacio smiled and said, "If fate wills it, we'll meet again." Chapter 877. Although the passageway seemed a little eerie and strange, the guests felt a sense of relief when they reached the end of the passageway. They didn't feel stuffy because they were deep underground. At the same time, the air wasn't turbid, even though candlelight was used to illuminate the place. The ventilation system here seemed to be quite good. Many oak barrels could be seen all around, and the aroma of red wine filled the air. The guests gathered in twos and threes, chatting about something. At this time, Jean Louis had already dealt with a few waves of men who approached her because they saw her alone. At this time, a servant dressed in the manor's uniform brought in a cart a batch of unbranded red wine. There were about 30 bottles. After that, the other servants came out with the tools to open the wine and decanters. Not long after, the servants were like butterflies, weaving among the guests and serving them the freshly brewed wine. At this time, a servant walked toward Jean Louis with a tray with a few glasses of red wine. But very soon, this servant was stopped by someone. It was Lady Eve. Lady Eve took 2 glasses from the servant's hand and smiled. The servant nodded and retreated. Lady Eve came to Jean Louis' side and brought her a glass. Jean Louis took it and thanked Madame Eve. Madame Eve giggled at this time, her breasts surging. The interaction between women seemed to start with compliments. At this time, Jean Louis was admiring the necklace that Madame Evelyn was wearing. He said carefully, "If I'm not mistaken, this should be the Light of the Forest, made by the master jewelry maker, Pyre Phyllis, using 7 different kinds of emeralds. And the one in the middle is called the Eye of the Forest, right?" Lady Eve looked at Jean Louis and said with a smile, "You seem to know a lot about jewelry." Jean Louis also smiled and said, "It's normal for women to have some research on jewelry. When I was in school, I worked as a jewelry auctioneer for half a year, so I know a little more. Looks like I finally found someone I can talk to." Lady Eve raised her glass at Jean Louis. Jean Louis was not unfamiliar with this kind of occasion to communicate with noble ladies. Her mannerisms were impeccable, and Lady Eve's smile grew wider and wider. "If I remember correctly, you have a male companion?" Lady Eve suddenly asked. "What about our god of gamblers' disciple?" Jean Louis said calmly, "Just now, Mr. Tu asked someone to tell him that he had something to do, so he left. They should be here soon. Is Lady Eve looking for Ajay?" "It's nothing." Lady Eve shook her head. "I just didn't say hello to him when we were at the vineyard. I haven't seen that child for several years. I heard that he's doing well outside, so I wanted to hear about his wonderful life. After all, I'm his elder." "Lady Eve is so beautiful. You don't seem like an elder at all." Jean Louis smiled and complimented, "I miss his sister more. Miss Jean really knows how to talk." Lady Eve shook her head and said sadly, "I'm actually old. I can't even hide the wrinkles on my face. I can't compare to you young ladies." Jean Louis said, "There's a kind of beauty that needs time to grow. Lady Eve's time is just right." Lady Eve pursed her lips and smiled, then suddenly said, "Do you want to take a closer look at it? Light of the Forest. I can take it off and let you take a closer look." "Can I?" Jean Louis appeared to be tempted. However, she looked around and saw that they were surrounded by guests. Then she shook her head. Lady Eve said, "Beautiful jewelry needs to be appreciated quietly. Besides, you are my soulmate. I am very happy to let you touch it. There's a quiet room next door. That place might be suitable for us, as long as we don't miss the opening of the legendary Forgotten River wine." Jean Louis made an inviting gesture. Lady Eve gently pulled Jean Louis' hand and said with a smile, "Trust me, you will be a lucky one." The voices gradually faded away. The place that Haidasir brought Luaccio to was increasingly secluded. Truth be told, Haidasir gave Luaccio the feeling that he was very familiar with the structure of the cellar. However, considering that this ancient castle was built by Haidasir's ancestor, Baron Fernandez, there was nothing strange about it. "Shouldn't we be going to the wine-tasting place?" Luaccio suddenly asked. Hydasir said, "Don't worry, I have a better place. Besides, I don't want the environment here to ruin your mood. I want you to be able to remain relaxed and happy. You should also try your best to relax." "Relax?" Luocio asked curiously. "Do I look like I am nervous?" "No, no, no. I'm talking about a while." Hydasir said slowly, "Some vampires do not eat well, even losing their sense of beauty. Just think about it. For us, sucking blood is like eating. Say, in a high-class restaurant, when we're eating steak, someone would reach out to grab it and chew on it. Isn't that indecent?" Luocio nodded in agreement. He did not have any opinion on the different rules for different occasions. Paying attention to etiquette in a Western restaurant was a form of culture. Just like the setting off of firecrackers during traditional Chinese festivals, it was also a form of culture. There was no such thing as pretentious. Since eating is something that you need to pay attention to, why are there such rude fellows? Luocio asked curiously. As far as I know, the vampires described in the books are graceful. Each of them seems to have the blood of nobility flowing through their veins. Hydasir said, "We are always used to keeping good impressions. For example, in the human world, how many people praise the ancient emperors? Yes, that's right. Vampires are indeed graceful. Their long lives give them enough time to learn and maintain some decaying rules to pass the time. However, this is relative to the type that has been around for a long time. In fact, there are many young vampires in today's society. They will not be too lenient. This is especially true for vampires who didn't evolve in the normal way. Abnormal way, besides the embrace. Is there any other way for vampires to transform?" Hydasir nodded and said, "Yes, there is a witchcraft that can transform people into vampires. This strange witchcraft was created by a mixed blood. His father is a vampire and his mother is a witch. In the interracial union, this pair of lovers accidentally broke through the reproductive isolation and gave birth to a mixed blood. He inherited the abilities of vampires and also possesses powerful witchcraft." Luocio could not help but sigh and said, "There are so many wonderful things in the world." Hydasir agreed and said, "Yes, even for us, who have a long life, we will never know our own insignificance." Luocio was very good at getting clues from conversations. His heart skipped a beat, and he said, "From what you said, could it be that in today's hunt, there is a witchcraft transformation? My friend, your mind is sharp enough." Hydasir smiled and said, "There is, and you have already seen it." "Takizawa?" "Yes." Hydasir nodded and said, "Takizawa, including the entire family behind him, are all products of witchcraft transformation. Takizawa's ancestor was once the mixed blood servant. When his ancestor was on his deathbed, due to his thirst for life, he asked his master to transform him into a vampire. Since then, a family of vampires outside of the traditional tradition was born." Luocio pondered and said, "It seems to me that you don't like the witchcraft transformation of vampires." Hydasir said, "That is because you have not seen Takizawa's true form. Ugly is no longer enough to describe them. They're like giant leeches, and they're crazy about fresh blood. That's really a sight that's not very appetizing." Hydasir suddenly stopped. There was an exquisite door in front of him. Hydasir pushed open the door and entered. The room was very neatly arranged, and the floor was covered with soft blankets. The luxurious decorations were in no way inferior to those of five-star hotel suites. Hydasir pointed to a large sofa and gestured for Luocio to sit down. As for Chun Xiaolian, he walked to the clothes rack at the side and took off his jacket. At the same time, he undid the top two buttons on his collar and rolled up his sleeves. "If it is hot, it does not matter if I take it off." Luocio shook his head and said, "I feel fine. Do you want to listen to some music?" Hydasir asked in a soft voice. Luocio shook his head. At this moment, Hydasir slowly walked over, a wicked smile on his face. If one were to look carefully, one would discover that Hydasir's lips were purple in color, giving off a demonic feeling. He came to stand before Luocio and said softly, "Do you know, we will not casually bare our fangs at humans because we are also very picky about food. We are not like the Takizawa family, who will eat anything when they are hungry. Of course, except for hunting days. He put his finger on Luacio's shoulder and moved it slowly. Basically, we will bring a blood servant with us. Of course, the blood servant's role is not only to provide us with fresh blood, but also to deal with many worldly chores for us. Therefore, the selection of blood servants is also very strict. Not only do they have to be excellent, but they must also be liked by us. A strange light flashed in Hydasir's eyes. At the same time, he moved his hand to Luacio's chin and gently lifted it. I really like you. Originally, I did not intend to find a blood servant today. Luacio, accept my love. Hydasir's eyes suddenly flashed with red light. When he opened his mouth slightly, two sharp teeth were exposed. He looked at the motionless Luacio and wanted to kiss his lips. No wonder I always felt that something was wrong. What? Bang! In his astonishment, Hydasir only felt that his body was suddenly hit by a huge force. This force was so huge that he could not resist it at all. His whole body was sent flying and then directly crashed into the thick stone wall. His whole body even sank into the wall. A smear of red blood was spat out from Hydasir's mouth. He seemed to have suffered a serious internal injury. In fact, at the moment of impact, Hydasir could even hear that at least 8 bones in his body were broken. If it were not for the vampire's strong body, this would have killed him. However, instead of feeling fear, Hydasir showed another kind of fanatical expression. Oh, Luacio, I didn't expect you to have such a powerful force. I can't suppress my love. I really love you so much. When Luacio heard this, he only felt that his whole body was being tickled by ice-cold jelly. He let out a long sigh. It seems that my luck is starting to get bad. I didn't expect that the first one to come back would be disgust. Hydasir got off the wall at this time. He easily straightened his broken arm, tore open his shirt with one hand, and unbuttoned the rest of the buttons, revealing his pale chest. Ah, Luacio, you remind me of the druid 50 years ago. You're full of the pure breath of nature, always so elegant and intellectual. Hydasir showed an excited smile. I can't wait to press you under my body. Oh, this damn aristocratic etiquette. Why do I still care about this now? I should hold you in my arms. Hydasir directly pounced on Luacio at this time. Luacio did not know any fighting skills, and he did not know what level of strength he had now. In the face of Hydasir's crazy pounce, he just instinctively waved his arm, not wanting to let this guy touch him again. Hydasir once again endured an unparalleled force, and his whole body fell to the ground. This time, he felt that more than half of his bones had been broken. Even with the vampire's super recovery ability, he could not recover in a short time. You? Who are you? Hydasir suddenly felt that he had made a big mistake. You are not an ordinary, undying disgust. Luacio glanced at Hydasir and muttered to himself. Next is the impulse to destroy you. It seems that negative emotions are easier to wake up directly. I don't know if I will feel happy after killing you. Let's give it a try. This person, what is he talking about? Hydasir forced himself to raise his head, and what he saw was the other's ice-cold gaze. However, his expression was so natural. Please wait a minute, you. Are you here for the true blood? Hydasir spat out a mouthful of blood at this time, and only then did he finish his words. The invisible force pressing on him was getting stronger. He even felt that once he gave up this place, his body would be crushed into a pile of minced meat. True blood? What is that? Luacio's curiosity was aroused again. The murderous intent that had just surged out of him, which he wasn't particularly satisfied with, but it was real, disappeared in an instant. Yin 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 Yin. Chapter 878. No woman would be able to resist the beauty of a jewel, regardless of whether they had the ability to buy it or could only look at it and sigh. Even women who didn't like money wouldn't be stingy with their admiring gazes. Zhong Luoyue used to be a jewelry auctioneer when she was studying. The main reason was to meet and get to know the nobles of the upper class. The other reason was because she loved the beautiful jewels. Therefore, when Lady Eve took off her Light of the Forest and said that she could lend it to Zhong Luoyue to try on, this noble lady didn't refuse. First of all, she really liked the jewels. Second of all, She wouldn't let Lady Eve and herself get into an argument. She was also a businesswoman. This Lady Eve's origin was a bit mysterious, but she always exuded the aura of a true noble. Who knew if they wouldn't meet again in the future? The so-called social network was something that one had unknowingly accumulated. In this society that relied on relationships, connections were the greatest wealth. The more powerful a person was, the more they understood this principle. In an elegant room filled with incense, Lady Eve was putting the light of the forest on Zhong Luoyue in front of a full-body mirror. Under the light, the resplendent jewel emitted a luster that only a truly precious jewel could have. As a former jewelry auctioneer, Zhong Luoyue could roughly estimate the value of this light of the forest. In the mirror, Lady Eve was standing behind Zhong Luoyue. After putting the light of the forest on her, Lady Eve leaned forward and pressed her hands on Zhong Luoyue's arms. She said softly, "Look at you, you really suit it. You flatter me." Zhong Luoyue smiled. Lady Eve reached out to touch Zhong Luoyue's cheeks. This action made Zhong Luoyue feel a bit uncomfortable, but she didn't move too much. Young, confident, beautiful. Lady Eve closed her eyes and sniffed the area behind Zhong Luoyue's ear like a lover. "Miss Zhong, I rarely get to experience your fragrance." From time to time, the tip of her nose would even touch the back of Zhong Luoyue's neck, giving Zhong Luoyue the feeling that this Lady Eve would kiss him at any moment. "Lady Eve?" Zhong Luoyue furrowed her brows. In the end, her physical discomfort trumped her mental calmness. She turned around and broke free from Lady Eve's touch. However, Lady Eve quickly reined herself in. She crossed her arms in front of her stomach and smiled elegantly. Facing Zhong Luoyue, who was looking at her strangely, she asked gently, "Is something the matter, Miss Zhong?" Unexpectedly, Zhong Luoyue's eyes widened. There was even a trace of panic in them. She looked at Lady Eve and suddenly took a step back. She let out a startled and uncertain voice. "You, me?" Lady Eve smiled again. She seemed to have sensed that something was wrong with her. She tilted her head slightly and looked at the mirror next to her. In the full-body mirror, Lady Eve's body was graceful and charming. However, there was something between her lips that ruined this normal beauty. "You accidentally exposed yourself." Madame Eve covered her mouth with her hand and chuckled. Fangs appeared between her lips. "You? Were you?" Zhong Luoyue forced herself to calm down and asked tentatively, "Or is this just a prank?" Lady Eve? She didn't believe that such a thing existed in the world. However, since she used some tricks to get a mysterious black car back from her second brother, she felt that she seemed to have come into contact with some unusual things. Especially when she couldn't figure out the material of the black card after asking people to study it for a long time. In the end, she privately visited an old man who was in the same generation as her grandfather. At the same time, he was also an elder of another family that didn't belong to the Zhong family. However, she still found it hard to believe. She had more reasons to believe that this Lady Eve was just a disguise. For example, because of some hobby, she specially wore a pair of vampire's fake teeth. However, it was clear that today's event was not a masquerade. A prank. Lady Eve laughed, her big breasts surging. "Miss Zhong, is this based on fear and self-protection?" She walked towards Zhong Luoyue step by step, causing Zhong Luoyue to instinctively retreat. At the same time, the fear in Zhong Luoyue's heart grew stronger. Because in just a few steps, Lady Eve turned from a beautiful woman in the eyes of men to an old woman. The wrinkles on her face were like withered tree bark, and her shiny skin had almost turned gray. Her body was rapidly losing weight. No word could describe her current appearance. Lady Eve's laughter was like the sound of wind blowing dry leaves on a cement road, making one's scalp tingle. "I really hate the existence of mirrors at this time." Lady Eve waved her hand, and the full-body mirror shattered in an instant. Zhong Luoyue did not have time to be frightened by this scene, because the moment the mirror shattered, Lady Eve had already reached out to grab her. Lady Eve's withered hand was far stronger than a burly adult male's. Zhong Luoyue felt as if her shoulder was about to be crushed. but she was not really frightened to the extent that she was completely dumbfounded. In this generation of the Zhong family, 2 sons and 1 daughter were sent by grandfather Zhong to train since they were young. Although Zhong Liu's time in the military was shorter than her eldest and second brothers, she still learned some real self-protection skills. When faced with danger, she immediately calmed down and quickly hit Lady Eve's neck with her palm. This chop was not as powerful as those annoying karate masters who could chop bricks, but it was definitely not as simple as a normal person being hit by a chop. However, Madame Eve was unmoved. She didn't even move. She just chuckled. They actually resisted before. No, it should be said that they struggled. But someone like you is still the first one. I originally preferred the younger one I met in the vineyard, but your performance is really good. I think it's a good idea to let you become my blood servant. Zhong Liu did not know who Lady Eve was referring to by them, but without a doubt, they were most likely the victims in Lady Eve's hands. Worse, they were probably already dead. Zhong Liu did not have the time to create more opportunities for herself to obtain more information. Right now, she only wanted to escape from this great danger. She quickly retracted her palm from Lady Eve's neck and hit the elbow of Lady Eve's arm that was grabbing her shoulder. It caused Lady Eve's arm to bend a little, and Zhong Liu's shoulder loosened. Zhong Liu did not miss this opportunity. Instead, she used a side kick straight at Lady Eve's head. However, Zhong Liu's ankle was caught in an instant. Lady Eve sneered and grabbed Zhong Liu's ankle. She suddenly flung it. Zhong Liu's whole body was thrown into the air and heavily hit the corner of the wall. She let out a painful groan. A monstrous strength. Zhong Liu clearly realized that Lady Eve was not an enemy that could be defeated with just some fighting skills. She crawled up in a slight panic and pressed on her shoulder at the same time. This shoulder was grabbed and thrown to the wall, so it was already injured. Lady Eve calmly walked over at this time. More of the superiority came from facing a creature that was far weaker than herself. Oh no, it should be food. Zhong Liu was currently drenched in cold sweat and panting rapidly. She looked at Lady Eve's footsteps and saw that Lady Eve was closing in on her. Finally, Lady Eve was only an arm's length away from her. Have you given up resisting? Lady Eve revealed a creepy smile and slightly opened her mouth at the same time. In an instant, Zhong Liu's eyes became sharp and her uninjured arm shot out like lightning. At the same time, a loud sound burst out at the same time. Lady Eve's eyes widened and her body suddenly froze. Her eyeballs rolled up, not to roll her eyes, but to look at her own forehead. But obviously, she couldn't see it. At the center of Lady Eve's forehead, there was a small, bloody hole, and Zhong Liu was holding a long lipstick in her hand. In other words, it was a weapon disguised as a lipstick. The last life-saving measure. Zhong Liu looked at her lipstick. It was made of ceramic, and even the bullet was made of ceramic, so it could pass the metal detection test before the banquet. But it could only shoot 1 bullet, and its power was not comparable to a real pistol, but it was enough to kill. After being shot in the forehead, Lady Eve's body slowly fell down, but she obviously didn't die. Under Zhong Liu's incredulous gaze, the wound on Lady Eve's forehead started to wriggle little by little, and the bullet that was shot in her brain was slowly pushed out at this time. This kind of monster couldn't be defeated by human strength. Once this thought came to her mind, fear surged like a tide. Zhong Liu suddenly shivered and rushed out of the door before Lady Eve recovered her ability to move. However, what she didn't know was that an even greater danger, an even more terrifying thing, and an abyss of fear was behind this door. The moment she opened the door, she saw a real monster appear in the venue of the banquet where so many guests were gathered. Its hands and feet were pressed on the ground, and its hair was extremely long. Its facial features were no longer the facial features of a human. The round mouth that occupied almost half of its face was lined with sharp teeth. At the same time, the tongue that was sticking out from the mouth was unbelievably thick and long. At this moment, it was really a tentacle-like tongue that was coiling around a woman and lifting her up high. At the end of the tongue, there was another organ that was used to bite people. It was biting on the neck of the woman who was coiled around. In midair, the long tongue was like a straw, and the woman's body was quickly sucked dry. Around her, there were more withered corpses with faces full of fear and despair. However, most of the guests were scared out of their wits. They hid under the ridiculous table or curled up in the corner. This hellish scene, Jean Luoyue instantly felt like she had fallen into an ice cellar. What kind of abyss have I fallen into? Jean Luoyue looked back in horror, only to see Lady Eve's body twitching and slowly standing up. She was shocked, but she still didn't care too much and only wanted to escape from this place. Before Lady Eve completely recovered, and before the blood-sucking monster noticed her. Escape. 10 minutes ago, the banquet had started for some time, and when many guests were discussing how this new batch of wine was compared to the previous ones, the program that they had been waiting for a long time finally arrived. He didn't know where he had heard the rumor. Rumor had it that at this wine party, Wine Master Tushini would take out the legendary Daylily River of Forgetfulness and drink it with a lucky person. The same series of Daylily wine was once sold at a sky-high price in an auction, and for many people who loved wine, it was like a dream wine. Under everyone's expectation, a man slowly walked out at this time, and at the same time, he pushed out a huge roulette. It was the man who took out the magical treasure ball in the banquet hall not long ago. The rich man who wanted to buy this treasure ball recognized it immediately. The person who pushed the roulette was Takizawa. He pushed the roulette to the front of everyone's sight, then smiled and cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, the next moment will be an exciting moment. Do you know what I'm going to do next? Everyone held their breath, looking at Takizawa's face with a smile. Takizawa said loudly, "I believe that before entering the banquet hall, you have already received a crystal ball with a number engraved on it, right? Now, please let me see the crystal ball in your hands, okay?" The ladies took out the crystal ball and held it in front of them. At this time, Takizawa turned his body very beautifully in front of everyone, and then held the edge of the huge roulette with both hands. His eyes flashed with a strange light, and he continued to say loudly, "See this roulette? See the number on this roulette? Ladies and gentlemen, you are smart. Have you guessed what I'm going to do next? Answer me. Have you guessed it?" "I guessed it." The ladies' voices were more prominent. At this time, Takizawa suddenly used his strength to turn the huge roulette, and the rapidly spinning roulette was like a whirlpool. Finally, under everyone's nervous waiting, the roulette slowly stopped. The needle finally stopped at the range, representing the number 18. At this time, Takizawa opened his hands and said loudly, "Please tell me, where is the lucky one?" "It's me. It's me." It was the rich man who wanted to buy the treasure ball before. He raised the crystal ball in his hand, looking very proud, and happily pushed the crowd away and walked in front of Takizawa. "It's me. We meet again." "Yes, we meet again." Takizawa smiled, "Mr. Lucky One." Chapter 879. Like a monster, the stout man's body, which was being lifted up, was rapidly drying up. The moment it happened, the scene was silent. Someone suddenly screamed, and the scene instantly turned into a disaster scene. They scrambled to push each other as they fled towards the exit. They couldn't care less about anything else. At this time, after Takizawa sucked the stout man dry, he suddenly jumped up and landed on a table covered with a white cloth. Like an animal, his four limbs were pressed on the table, and the long tongue that extended out from the huge mouth, the long tongue that looked like a straw, was swaying in front of him. Suddenly, the long tongue shot out and easily wrapped around a woman who fell to the ground and sprained her knee because she was pushed and pulled. Takizawa didn't pay attention to the people who fled in fear. Instead, he concentrated on enjoying his food. Because he didn't need to. Because the guests who fled in panic found that the exit leading to the outside, had been completely blocked. In front of the door, an iron gate fell down instantly. When the first guest ran to the exit, intending to escape with his life, his body slammed into the iron gate, and fear erupted. There was no way out in front, and behind them, the blood-sucking monster was slaughtering their own kind one by one. Someone's head was twisted and then raised high. Blood gushed out from the broken head like a waterfall. Takizawa raised his head and drank the warm liquid. He was like a grasshopper with the jumping ability of a blood-sucking leech, constantly flying in the hall to catch his prey. No, it should be reaching out to get his food. Simple, violent, and bloody. Some people had already fainted from fear. However, the fear didn't stop because of this. This was the scene that Jean Luoyue saw when she opened the door after temporarily escaping from Lady Eve. When Lady Eve regained her ability to move and rushed out of the small room alone, less than a minute had passed. Jean Luoyue only had enough time to hide behind a huge vase in this hall. Because there was no place to escape, more people were more willing to block the blocked exit, crazily shouting and slapping, but it was useless. At this moment, Lady Eve rushed out of the door with anger, turned into a black wind, and suddenly caught a woman who was crying in fear and had her makeup removed. Lady Eve directly bit the woman's neck, but her fierce eyes were still sweeping back and forth in the hall. Obviously, she was already planning who the next prey would be. After sucking the woman's blood, Madame Eve pushed her away. The woman was already on the verge of death. Lady Eve's body at this time had recovered some plumpness, but her eyes had already fallen on the vase. But Lady Eve didn't go there. However, at this time, Jean Luoyue could hear Lady Eve's voice, as if she was whispering softly in her ears. She said, "I won't touch you immediately. I will let you crawl towards me in fear and despair. Then beg me to let you go, beg me to let you go, beg me to let you become my blood slave. Because by becoming my blood slave, you won't die here, you will be able to leave, you will be able to breathe the fresh air, and you will be able to see the outside world again. You will. Jean Luoyue suddenly covered her ears, lowered her head. She had never felt so powerless before. The daughter of the top aristocratic family, the all-powerful trendsetter in the business world, in the face of this inhuman power, those things that could be relied on were useless. But suddenly, a crashing sound came, followed by Lady Eve's angry voice. Jean Luoyue poked her head out to take a look, only to see Lady Eve hit a table and directly fell to the ground. At this time, in the center of the hall, stood a tall and sturdy man with abnormally solid muscles. At this moment, his legs were in a horse stance, making a posture of pushing out his right palm. Was he the one who sent Lady Eve flying with one palm? Takizawa had already noticed this scene. He had already fallen into a frenzied state. He didn't think much, and instantly rushed towards the man who knocked down Lady Eve. Takizawa's body leaped high. However, just as he was about to pounce on the man, Takizawa suddenly shot out his tongue. His tongue pressed against the floor. Using this as leverage, Takizawa abruptly changed his direction. Takizawa seemed to be dodging something. It was a flying knife. No, it should be a table knife. In the direction that Takizawa had deliberately dodged, 3 table knives suddenly appeared. They were lined up in a row and nailed to the huge turntable. There was another one. Jean Luoyue used her eyesight to look. She saw a slightly thin man among the curled-up crowd also stood up at this time. She didn't know where these 2 men came from, but it seemed that they had the ability to deal with Lady Eve and Takizawa. "Song-san, have you seen Miss?" At this time, the huge man in a horse stance loudly asked the thin man at this time. Song-san shook his head. "I haven't seen her. Maybe she didn't come down." "Songda, you and Song-air leave first. Quickly find Miss. I will hold these 2 monsters." "Song-san, Songda, surname Song?" Jean Luoyue frowned at this time. Her heart moved. These 2 guys who jumped out, perhaps there was a person called Song-air hiding in the dark. Could it be the people of the Song family? Were they secretly sent to protect Song Ying's safety? In just a moment, Jean Luoyue was almost sure of this speculation. Although the Song family was powerful, it was not as prosperous as the Zhong family. After all, the Song family only had 2 descendants. The old man of the Song family couldn't let Song Ying, the only granddaughter of the Song family, run around outside and not care about it. "That's great." Jean Luoyue secretly rejoiced. This master of the Song family seems to have some real skills. "Human warriors, how did you sneak in here?" Takizawa was obviously enraged. Without saying anything, he rushed towards Songda again. However, Song San hurriedly waved his hand at this time, shooting out a cold light, impressively picking up the scattered table knives on the ground. At this moment, Lady Eve had already climbed up from the ground, but there was a very conspicuous dent on her abdomen. She was actually heavily injured by Songda. I like strong men, especially men like you. Lady Eve screamed, also rushing towards Songda. Just out in the hall, a figure suddenly shot down from above, quickly kicking towards Lady Eve. It was a leg shadow that was too fast for the eyes to take in. It seemed to be an expert in leg martial arts. It should be Song Er. You go open the door. At this time, Song Er used leg martial arts to suppress Lady Eve at the same time as he shouted. Hearing this, Songda also shouted, angrily said, "Get out of the way." Those guests who were blocking the iron gate, at this time, all squeezed out at this time, only to see Songda running step by step. His footsteps were unusually heavy. Every time he stepped on the ground, it was like using an iron hammer to hit the floor, making a loud noise. Songda came in front of the iron gate, suddenly put his palms in front of his chest, then took a deep breath. The muscles on his arms instantly swelled, actually bursting the clothes on his hands, turned into a giant arm twice as thick as an ordinary person, and instantly struck out. Bang! The palm fiercely hit the iron gate, actually the solid iron gate, forcibly broke open. Songda took the lead at this time, directly rushed out. Only his voice came from the front of the passage. Air, Asan, don't fight. Find the miss, immediately evacuate. I will give you a signal. Even so, the iron gate has been broken by the godlike Songda. Those guests at this time were not willing to stay in such a dangerous place, immediately scattered, scrambling to escape. Of course, this included the Zhong family's third miss, Zhong Luoyue. But in her heart suddenly flashed a thought. Song family has such a hidden martial arts master. I don't know if the Zhong family has such a master or not. Grandpa, there's still a lot of things tightly hidden in the heart, including the origin of that black card. In the crowd, there were people constantly pushing her body forward to escape. Zhong Luoyue at this time did not have time to think about it. Damn, I actually let these food escape. Takizawa's voice has completely changed, gloomy and terrifying. At this time, after Song Er forced Lady Eve back with a kick, he quickly jumped back and just happened to land beside Song San. Song Er at this time said with a dignified face, Song San, these two monsters are not easy to deal with. That old witch took so many of my mighty King Kong leg, but nothing happened. Ada's King Kong palm also hit her. Didn't she still stand up? That is a 5-inch iron plate that can be broken through. Song San's face was not good at this time. This is great. I thought it was just a simple guard mission with food and drinks, but I am afraid this is a job that will cost me my life. Song Er said, Don't say any more. If the master did not take us 3 brothers in that year, I am afraid we will have to return all our kung fu to the Shaolin Temple. 18 years later, we are still good men. What are we afraid of? However, while the two were talking, a black shadow suddenly shot out, went straight past them, and went towards the entrance of the passage. Just when Song Er and Song San were about to chase, a huge figure fell in front of them. Takizawa, I will play with you. I hope you don't disappoint me. Takizawa laughed crazily, and at this time his body suddenly split into 2, turning into 2 slightly smaller individuals, at the same time more like a leech monster. Song Er and Song San looked at each other at this time. Song San took a deep breath at this time and stood out first. Monster, you forced me. I didn't intend to use this forbidden power. Song San took a deep breath and let his chest swell up. Takizawa and his doppelganger at this time bowed, staring at Song San, and did not move for a while. Although he was manic, he did not lose his mind. Song San suddenly shouted at this time, pushed out his hands, and suddenly a handful of small things were shot at Takizawa and his doppelganger, but it did not hurt at all. The small things fell to the ground with a clang. There was some candy that no one cared about at the banquet. Takizawa could not help but be stunned. Go! At this time, Song San shouted loudly, and the 2 of them ran away in the blink of an eye, leaving no trace behind. Haidasir finally felt that the pressure on his body disappeared. He quietly breathed a sigh of relief, feeling like he was reborn. He saw that Luaccio had sat back in his original place at this time, and then pointed to his side, but Luaccio quickly pointed to another single sofa on the side and said indifferently, "Sit." Haidasir gulped, slowly got up, and at the same time touched the black ring on his finger. This was a product of the Magician Association. It could be sensitive to powerful energy, and at the same time, it could be trained. For example, he trained himself that once there was an entity that could threaten his energy, the ring would send a warning. But obviously, in front of Luaccio, this ring seemed to be malfunctioning. Haidasir looked at Luaccio with fear. He did not know when such a powerful guy appeared in the dark world. Looking at him, he did not seem to have the characteristics of other non-human races. He looked like an ordinary human. Could he be a psychic? "Don't worry, I don't plan to do anything to you now." Luaccio looked at Haidasir and said indifferently, "And I believe that you won't have any strange thoughts about me now." Haidasir smiled embarrassedly. How would he dare? Or rather, even if you have any strange thoughts about me, I will be happy to cooperate. What is the true blood you mentioned just now? Luaccio began to ask. He always felt that it was hard to resist the other party's questions, and he would always be happy to tell him the answer in his heart. Haidasir was surprised in his heart, but he also slowly said, "The so-called true blood is a product specially made to replace the vampire's dependence on blood, or rather, a substitute for blood. You live on blood, but now you want to make a substitute that may replace blood. Why is that?" Luaccio was puzzled. It was like humans invented a substitute drink, but that thing was generally used by dieters. But vampires obviously did not need to lose weight, right? Haidasir smiled bitterly and said, "We have no choice." Luaccio, how much do you know about the current vampire community? Luaccio said indifferently, "My family has told me a little about the 13 clans. Family. Haidasir looked at Luaccio, and his heart became more and more cautious. A powerful guy like Luaccio has a family? Could this be a guy from a lost family? Well, I will start with the 13 clans. Haidasir nodded, then pondered for a moment, and finally sat down. That single sofa. Yin 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 yin. Chapter 880. Over the years, the 13 clans were divided into 4 different formations according to different formations. The Secret Alliance, the Devil's Feast Alliance, the Independent Clan, and the Extinct Clan. For thousands of years, the 13 clans had been in constant conflict because of their respective ideals. Internal strife was not just a purely human trait. According to Citasil, the strife between the various factions had developed from a real battle to a competition in different fields. But no matter what, they all followed the same idea: to work together to create a world that was better suited for the survival of vampires. Even if they had internal strife, they would still be united when facing external enemies. When they were separated, they were also unusually united. Therefore, in the dark world, the vampire community could be maintained. It could be said that it was because of the existence of the 13 clans that the vampire dynasty lasted for thousands of years. However, the 13 clans were not the only vampires. Other than the 13 clans, there were still other vampires. For example, the Takizawa clan, who reincarnated into vampires through a forbidden technique, the famous Impaler Duke in history, or the descendants of the vampire lily from another myth, and so on. The 13 clans had always considered themselves to be pure-blooded and orthodox, placing themselves at the bottom of the pyramid of the vampire community. Over the years, even if there were vampires who were strong enough to fight against a certain clan, they could not really participate in the patriarch society established by the 13 clans. Although there was no such thing as the vampire emperor, the patriarch society of the 13 clans was like the king of the vampire community. Citasil sighed and said, "In fact, it is not only in terms of strength that the 13 clans are the most powerful. In other places, those weak families rely too much on the 13 clans. And the most important thing is that the 13 clans strictly control the production of pure-blooded and purifying potions." Pure-blooded, purifying potions? Luaccio raised 2 questions. Citasil subconsciously shrunk his neck, feeling that he would become a traitor who wanted to reveal the secrets of the clan to outsiders in a state that he did not know. But Citisil still nodded. Pure-blooded, that is pure blood. The pure blood was provided by the blood thralls that the 13 families had raised since ancient times. Most of them lived in the territories of the 13 families, and some of them didn't even know that they existed as blood thralls. Every one of the 13 clans had their own pure blood production base. It was very secretive, and outsiders had no way of knowing about it. Legend has it that in every pure blood production area, there is still a primitive way of life. Modern civilization has never invaded, and because of this, the pure blood production can be maintained. Luaccio frowned. You said that modern civilizations cannot invade. What do you mean? Haidasir said, poison. The blood of the humans of today is unhealthy for us. Our conclusion is that with the advanced development of modern civilization, various kinds of pollution have invaded the human body. Viruses from promiscuity, chemicals that settle in the body due to taking too many synthetic substances. These are all toxins to us. The pure blood production base, apart from the fixed supply of the 13 families, only a small amount can be exported, but it is basically unable to supply the rest of the clansmen. The distribution is uneven. You should be able to imagine that some contradictions are inevitable. Luaccio nodded. Then what is the purifying potion? Citisil said, I said before, the supply of pure blood is limited, but for countless years, our population has been growing. You know, vampires have long lives, and they're scattered in different parts of the world. We cannot control our nature, and we need to survive. In a situation where we are unable to obtain pure blood, hunger will make us crazy, and instinct will defeat our rationality. We will still choose to consume unhealthy blood. Those toxins will accumulate in our bodies, and it will make us weak, causing our life to quickly deplete. Thus, the purifying potion was created. It was jointly developed by independent clans and extinct clans. It is an antibody that allows us to effectively resist these toxins, but it also needs to be used regularly to maintain. Citisil shook his head and said, rather helplessly, the 13 families almost control the two most important things for our survival. Even if we occasionally want to resist, in the end, there's nothing we can do until the concept of pure blood was proposed. A type of pure blood that can be artificially synthesized to replace pure blood, a pollution-free substitute. Do you know what this means for the clansmen who are oppressed? Luaccio pondered for a moment before slowly saying, freedom, freedom. Citisil nodded heavily. If we can grasp the creation of pure blood, it is equivalent to grasping the power to resist the dictatorship of the 13 families. We will rely on the existence of pure blood to rapidly develop, gather into a force, and fiercely enter the Council of Patriarchs to obtain the right to speak. Luaccio was silent for a while before suddenly saying, the 14th family. Citisil opened his mouth and then said with a wry smile, your gaze makes one feel fear. Indeed, some of us have indeed proposed this idea and have been active because of it. Let's hear it, Luaccio said indifferently. What does this have to do with you being here today? I represent the Fernandez family, Citisil said. This is also an ancient family of vampires. In addition, there is also the force behind Lady Eve, the Tequizua family behind Mr. Tequizua, Elizabeth's clansmen, and finally, there is Karen, which is us. Tushini is a descendant of Karen, and at the same time, he is the provider and researcher of pure blood. Over the years, we have been supporting him in researching pure blood. But for many years, we have been unable to succeed. Almost all we can get are semi-finished products, and the effects are not ideal. After many years of research, only one batch of usable products with better effects than pure blood was born, and that is the Daylily series. Luaccio asked in puzzlement, since pure blood is the method you intend to use to create the 14th family and enter the Patriarch Society, it should be quite confidential, right? Then why did you let the world know about the Daylily series and sell it in such a high-profile manner at the auction? Moreover, there is a legend that it disappeared after being drunk by rich merchants. That is just a cover. Citisil sighed and said, the 13 families are very strict in their control and monitoring of their clansmen. I'm afraid they have vaguely noticed something. So we thought of a way. Instead of hiding it, it is better to make it public in a high-profile manner. We will show this almost complete pure blood in a different manner. At the same time, we also reported this plan to the Patriarch Society. Citadel paused and said, "Well, you should know that the immortals are not really immortals. It is just that it is very difficult for us to die due to natural causes. But humans have mastered many methods to kill us. Apart from demon fighters, some of the weapons that humans possess also make us fearful. We only want to survive, not to hope for an all-out war with humans. So, any act of sucking blood needs to be reported. So, at that time, we planned an auction. Me, Eve, and Elizabeth's father bought these 3 daily series at a high price, using this to make Tushini famous. This way, Tushini, who has become a master winemaker, has the ability to attract a large number of people to come find him. So, in the past 20 years, every time Tushini opens a new red wine, there will be a wine tasting, and then it will be the day you eat." Citadel nodded and said, "Yes, we need to keep doing this so that the Patriarch Society will not suspect us. Because what we do not lack the most is time. The Patriarch Society's patience is beyond imagination. It is only in the past 1 or 2 years that their supervision over us has gradually relaxed." The rumor of that rich merchant, Elizabeth's father? Citadel hesitated for a moment and finally said, "He really disappeared after drinking the red spider lily. This is a situation that we did not expect. Afterwards, we can only say to the Patriarch Society that this is a deliberate illusion to add to the legend of Tushini." Luo Chio said, "Don't you know what will happen to the red spider lily after it drinks the almost complete true blood? Isn't it strange that you can't predict it?" No, we really don't know." Citadel hurriedly said, "The Daylily series was inadvertently produced by Tushini. He indeed said so. At first, it can indeed replace pure blood, but later we found out that after drinking each of them, there will be some side effects. The red spider lily can make people see their deceased lover, making people die of heart. Every true blood has a strange ability. The red spider lily can make people die of heart. Limbo can give vampires the ability to split, but at the same time, it can also split their personality, making them have to endure the torture of 2 different thoughts every day. 97 foot can give the vampire great power after drinking it, but at the same time, it will make the vampire's body become old. Every half a month, the vampire will lose all their power, becoming as weak as a 97-year-old man. This will last for an entire day. The Huang Quan that I possess brings fear." Citadel smiled bitterly and said, "It has the ability to let you summon the souls of the dead, but every day it will bring you the pain of death. Of course, you won't die a true death, but every time it happens, it will be so real. You won't feel numb, but the fear will only deepen every time. Until one day, you can no longer bear it, living a life worse than death, wishing you could die for real." "You don't look like you've drunk it." Luaccio shook his head. Citadel shrugged and said, "Of course, I haven't tried it myself, but it is not difficult to collect sample data, right? Because my tester could not bear the fear of death, he was willing to be exposed to the scorching sun, burning himself to death." "What about 3 lives and forgetfulness?" Luaccio asked directly. "Strictly speaking, 3 lives is not a wine, but a special gem," Citadel said. "But as long as it is placed in clean spring water, it can turn the spring water into sweet and mellow wine. It is said that 3 lives can make people dream of their previous life and awaken the memories of their previous life. It is said 3 lives is Karen's. She said it herself, but whether it is true or not, we don't know." Citadel shook his head and said, "Before this, Karen suddenly sent 3 lives to me and asked me to bring it here. I wanted to test it myself before I started, but the 3 lives gem has Karen's secret seal on it, so I can't open it. It can only be opened by Tushini, because Tushini is Karen's descendant and has her blood. There is also the forgetfulness and the last one. It seems that the last one has not been named." Luaccio nodded. Citadel's face suddenly showed some fear. "Strictly speaking, the forgetfulness is poison. For us, it is the most poisonous medicine. Once we drink it, our bodies will rot and turn into a pool of pus and blood. But for ordinary people, it is no different from ordinary red wine. It can even make ordinary people happy. As for the last one, it has not been named because it has not been truly brewed yet. It has not been opened and is hidden in Tushani's hands. This time, it happens to be the third hunting day this year, and Tushani sent us an invitation. Not only that, he even said in the letter that the true blood has been researched and will be revealed on the day of the hunting day. But he asked us to return the Daylily series. We guessed that the true blood might be the last Daylily series. After finally finishing, Citacil looked at Luaccio with apprehension, fearing that this guy who could easily kill him would not let him go so easily. I have already told you the secret of the true blood. If you're also interested in the true blood, I can help you get it. What I need the true blood for? Luaccio asked in amusement. Citacil said, if Tushani really succeeds in researching the true blood, then you, who have the true blood, will bring a huge impact to the vampire tribe. You will even have the ability to gain the support of a large number of vampires in a short time, and before Citacil could finish his description, Luaccio waved his hand and stopped Citacil from speaking. I'm not interested in your food substitutes. If there is anything I'm interested in, it is this Daylily series, especially the Red Spider Lily and 3 Lives, which sound very interesting. Citacil stood up at this time and said with a burning gaze, Luaccio, my friend. No, Lord Luaccio, I have witnessed your strength. Even a 5th-generation vampire can't defeat me so easily. You are even comparable to a 4th generation or even a 3rd generation undying. Please let me follow by your side. I will represent the Fernandez family and pledge my loyalty to you. At the same time, Fernandez quietly glanced at the ring on his hand. There was a faintly discernible crack. It was not that it did not react to Luaccio, but because the reaction was too strong, it had directly shattered in an instant. Even the power of a 4th-generation vampire could not break the ring. A 3rd generation was already at the level of the patriarchs of the 13 clans. The vampire impaler Duke, who was so powerful that he created a terrifying legend, was only equivalent to a 3rd generation. Luaccio looked Citacil up and down and shook his head. It's a pity that I got the wrong script, so your loyalty is useless to me. But we could be friends. Oh, I'm talking about ordinary friends, nothing else. Moreover, maybe we will have a chance to do business in the future. At the same time, the surface of the red wine bottle on the table suddenly shook slightly, rippling with ripples. Citacil subconsciously looked in a certain direction and frowned slightly. It seems that they have started hunting, but it seems a little too extreme. Chapter 881. If there was anyone else who was most familiar with the underground labyrinth apart from Citacir, it would naturally be the current owner of the castle, Tushani. In fact, in addition to some of the announced remodeled stone rooms, there were also many secret rooms here. For example, the secret room that Hydasir had initially used to greet Luaccio. Another example would be the place where Tushani was currently located. This place was more like a laboratory hidden deep underground. There were a large number of instruments here that Hydasir and the other vampires had obtained with their abilities. Some were even state-level technological products. There were a large number of huge containers in the laboratory. Inside the containers were many corpses preserved in a special liquid. Almost all of them were different specimens. There were human corpses, huge werewolves, beautiful fishmen with tails, and even vampires. These were the corpses that Hydasir and the others had hunted from all over the world for Tushani's research institute. At this moment, in a pure white room in the laboratory, Tushani was sitting quietly, looking at the screen on the wall. The screen was completely flat with the wall. At this moment, it was showing the scene of Takizawa, revealing his monstrous body and frantically hunting. Tushani only gave it a few glances. Even when Songda, Song Air, and Song San appeared in the crowd behind him, there was no change in his expression. He appeared to be waiting for something. In front of him, on the white table, there were different containers. They were the Daylily series that Hydasir had obtained. Tushani was waiting for one of the cups. The cup contained fresh spring water with a red crystal inside. At this moment, the clean spring water was slowly turning red. There was also an old notebook next to it. Tushini fetched another cup. Then, he took out the resurrection lily from Elizabeth, opened it, and poured it into the cup. After that, he personally drank a mouthful. Tushini closed his eyes and quietly waited. Suddenly, Tushini revealed a pained expression and then tightly grasped his heart. The pain didn't last long. Tushini's expression began to relax. He took a deep breath and took out the second vial of yellow spring. He poured out some more and personally tried it. He would personally try each bottle, except for the 3 lives and the river of forgetfulness. And every time he drank a different one, Tushini would personally experience the side effects. It would become painful, but he would quickly recover. It was only during the final Naiha that Tushini did not show any signs of abnormality. He snorted, "Takizawa, you sly bastard." Tushini took a deep breath and calmed down. He picked up the notebook beside him and flipped through it. He flipped through it page by page, looking very serious. Only when he flipped to the last page, Tushini's eyes changed. That was because the last few pages of the notebook had been torn off and gone missing. He had flipped through this notebook countless times. What is the formula? Tushini slowly closed his eyes. But in the blink of an eye, Tushini opened his eyes. He reached out and grabbed the cylindrical vessel containing the Naiha and smashed it on the screen on the wall. "All of you will die." Tushini's eyes became cold. He reached out and pressed a button on the edge of the table. In an instant, the wall on one side of the room cracked open. A man who was missing a finger and only wore a black finger ring slowly walked out. He was the gambling demon Gene Wu City's Uncle Gene. Uncle Gene also held a remote control in his hand. He came to Tushini's side and put the remote control in front of Tushini. Tushini just glanced at it, then looked at Uncle Gene and said coldly, "Oh Yang Jia, you haven't sent him away yet?" Uncle Gene said expressionlessly, "No one in the castle knows what happened in the maze of the cellar. Besides, Ajay is asleep now. It doesn't matter if you don't send him away. Moreover, the woman he likes is still inside, you see." Tushini said, "I have no interest in this little rascal's romance. That girl insisted on coming. What does it have to do with me?" Uncle Gene sighed and said indifferently, "Then what you promised me." Tushini stood up and stared at Uncle Gene. "Don't worry, I promise to give you immortality. I won't break my promise. You have been serving me all these years. I won't forget. After this matter is over, I will fulfill your wish. Now do it." "I hope so." Uncle Gene nodded. He silently picked up the remote control and slowly pressed it. At the same time, some of the hidden doors in the maze suddenly opened, and some of the fellows who had been trapped in those doors were released. Project Trueblood. In the place where all the people involved were gathered, Amance didn't relax for a moment, his gaze always on Elizabeth. His fingers slowly squeezed the stamina, replenishing potion that Citasil had given him in his pocket, his heart heavy. Elizabeth was like an albino patient, and besides her albino symptoms, Elizabeth was actually no different from a 15 or 16-year-old girl. But Amance knew that Elizabeth's true age was already over 30. It was only because she had spent most of her time sleeping that her body's growth had slowed down. Ever since Elizabeth was born, she had never really drunk human blood. She had been maintaining her life by injecting pure blood provided by the 13 clans. Every time, Amance would personally inject the pure blood into Elizabeth because he was Elizabeth's only remaining relative. Amance's daughter, Elizabeth's mother, was a pure human. Elizabeth was a hybrid between a vampire and a human. Hybrids were not recognized by the 13 clans. Because of the existence of hybrids, it was equivalent to breaking the reproductive isolation between different races. The arrogant vampires, the older generation that had been holding on to the traditions of the vampire clan for countless years, saw this as a challenge to the pure vampire bloodline. The 13 clans recognized Elizabeth's existence because she did indeed have vampire blood. But at the same time, the 13 clans also didn't recognize Elizabeth's right to be a vampire because half of her blood flowed through her body. Now, The 13-clan supply of pure blood to Elizabeth was becoming less and less. In the end, they even had to use special methods to make Elizabeth sleep to reduce the consumption of her body and delay the hunger of her body. He didn't allow Elizabeth to drink blood, and it was also his daughter Lola's last wish. Elizabeth was a kind child, and she herself also rejected the act of directly drinking blood. This was the only remaining grandchild, and in the past few decades, they've been working hard to achieve this goal, carefully advancing forward. Amance knew that he was walking on a tightrope, and if he wasn't careful, he would fall into a bottomless abyss. Once he couldn't suppress the half of Elizabeth's vampire blood, all his efforts over the years would be in vain. All the pain Elizabeth had endured over the years would also be in vain. But Elizabeth's body was too hungry, and there were many times when the urge to drink blood destroyed Elizabeth's rationality. There were many times when Amance managed to suppress Elizabeth with difficulty. He was old, and was no longer one of the 12 holy knights of the Round Table. His speed slowed down year by year, and his stamina weakened year by year. He even had to give up wearing armor in order to reduce the consumption of stamina. Amance didn't know if he had the ability to suppress Elizabeth the next time she went berserk. Perhaps what awaited him was the end. Looking at Amance lying on the table like a feverish patient, Amance showed a pained expression in his half-awake state. The torment in his heart was no less than when he saw his own daughter die tragically at the hands of Elizabeth's father. That guy who endured the urge to drink blood all the time for love. In the end, his rationality was annihilated by instinct. That was why he supported Project Trueblood, and that was why he drank the red spider lily. In fact, his heart had already died long ago, and he drank the red spider lily just to see Elizabeth's mother again. If there is a God, why is he so cruel to this child? Amance slowly placed his palm on Elizabeth's forehead, feeling her body temperature that was far lower than normal people's. Even so, he knew that Elizabeth was suffering a burning pain at this moment. The hungry vampire blood was burning crazily, and it was attacking the persistence of this weak child. "Grandpa, I feel terrible." Elizabeth opened her eyes and tightly grabbed Amance's sleeve. At the same time, Amand held Elizabeth's hand tightly and whispered in her ear, "Elizabeth, mania is a common problem for vampires. But since you have chosen this path, you have to persevere. Every time you endure the madness is a success of your efforts. You are a persevering person, and fate always loves persevering people. This time, if Tushani really develops the perfect true blood, you'll be able to obtain a new life. You will be like a normal person, living under the sun normally." "Grandpa," she twisted her body in pain, and her lips had already revealed the mark of a vampire, the blood-sucking fangs. Amance's heart suddenly softened, and he took out a small box from his pocket with trembling hands. Inside were the few remaining pure blood and the tools for injection. At this moment, Amance almost had the urge to inject the pure blood into Elizabeth immediately. But at the same time, he understood that if he injected the pure blood into Elizabeth on the day of madness, her vampire instincts would be stimulated even more. This was not the first time he had suffered such a loss. His heart had softened more than once. He was injured again and again because of this, and until now, he had no ability to stop the mistakes from happening. "Grandpa, I am so lucky." "Elizabeth." Amance opened the box with trembling hands and took out the tools for injection. His eyes were full of struggle, and at the same time, they were wet. "Elizabeth, Grandpa. Grandpa will make you feel better." A drop of blood stuck to the tip of the needle did not drip down due to the tension of the liquid, but it swayed slightly. Every drop of pure blood was precious and should not be wasted. However, Amance was in too much pain, and his trembling hands made it difficult for him to maintain his stability. "No." At the moment when the needle was about to enter the vein on Elizabeth's arm, he heard Elizabeth's painful voice. Amance shuddered and slammed the syringe on the table. He grabbed his hair and said with a hoarse voice, "What am I doing? I am sorry, Elizabeth." He was really old, and his heart had softened day by day. He no longer had the steel-like will of the past. Now, he was just a lonely old man who had lost his loved ones. Amance took a deep breath and once again grasped Elizabeth's hand, hoping to give her some courage to resist the pain. This was the only thing he could do. However, at this moment, a strange sound began to sound. Something was letting out a low growl, like that of a wild beast. Amance instinctively felt that danger was approaching. He moved quickly and directly pulled out the umbrella sword and held it in his hand. At the same time, he quickly glanced at Elizabeth. The feeling of danger did not come from Elizabeth, but from outside the door. Bang dash! The sound of impact. Something was crazily hitting the door in front of him. Amance suddenly shouted, "Too shinny! Too shinny! Come out! What the hell is going on?" However, no matter how he shouted, he did not receive any response. The frequency of the door being slammed also became faster and faster. Finally, the door was smashed open. At the same time, what appeared in front of Amand was a rotting, stinking corpse that was barely recognizable. The corpse could move and was staggering toward Amance. Amance suddenly rushed forward and quickly waved his arm. The sharp, pure silver blade instantly chopped off the head of the rotting corpse, causing it to fall to the ground. However, the headless corpse did not stop, but continued to move forward. At the same time, behind the corpse that broke through the door, a large number of rotten corpses were densely packed at the door. Zombies, a kind of failed product in the process of transforming into vampires. As one of the 12 holy knights of the Round Table, Amance was no stranger to the cause of zombies. However, when he saw the number of zombies blocking the door, he could not help but gasp. Tushini built a research lab in the basement maze, not far from where we gathered. We should be arriving soon. While speaking, Haidasir observed Luaccio. Haidasir was lucky to escape from the hands of this powerful undead and temporarily acted as a guide. He did not know if Luaccio was really only interested in Lycoris flower and Sanshin, because as a dark merchant, Haidasir would have reservations about everything and anyone. Haidasir had already pledged his loyalty to Luaccio, but the other party clearly did not intend to accept it. In a situation where he could not form a stable relationship, Haidasir was now thinking about how to get away from this dangerous guy, or rather, escape. There's a sound. Luaccio suddenly stopped. Haidasir was stunned and took 2 steps forward. The two of them had just arrived at a relatively spacious place in the basement maze. There were many square pools around. These were used to store water, so the purpose was naturally for the people hiding. There's a sound. Haidasir looked around, and finally his eyes fell on one of the pools. Perhaps it was because of the infiltration of the rainwater on the ground. This pool was actually half filled with water. At this time, the water surface was slightly fluctuating. Suddenly, a drop of liquid dripped from above and landed on the water surface, instantly creating circles of ripples. Haidasir subconsciously looked up. In the darkness above his head, countless tiny eyes appeared. They seemed to come from some kind of creature. Among the countless tiny eyes, there was a particularly large group of 8 eyes that suddenly blinked. Haidasir waved his hand, and his palm emitted an aquamarine light, allowing him to clearly see what was hidden in the darkness above the rock. However, at this moment, the place where the green light reached was filled with terrifying spiders. Their bodies were even larger than the tarantulas. Amidst this dense mass of terrifying spiders that covered the entire ceiling, there was actually a fellow with an incomparably large body. It was much larger than a bull. At this time, its body was standing upright, and its 8 terrifying eyes were looking at Haidasir and Luaccio at the same time. Why did Tushini release this thing? Haidasir's face was filled with shock. Yin PS1. Sure enough, it's impossible to update twice a day in a week. This week, I only returned 4 times. I still owe 3 times. Chapter 882. It was as though they had fallen into a spider's cave, and a mutated spider monster at that. That was especially true for the largest spider monster. It suddenly crawled on the ceiling, and some saliva flowed out from its huge mouth. The saliva dripped onto the floor and instantly corroded a part of the floor, causing white smoke to rise. Then, Haidasir's gaze shifted, and he suddenly said, "Be careful." This is a terrifying product of Shini's experiment. The acid it spits out can easily corrode even alloys. Moreover, it can also reproduce a large number of small spiders. These small spiders crawl very fast and contain very strong toxins. Once you get entangled by them, it will not be fun. I've already been entangled. Luaccio shook his head. Hydasir was taken aback. Then, he looked around in horror. The green light he released to illuminate the place had a very limited range. However, it could still illuminate other places while moving. At present, it was not just above them, even below them, all around them. At an unknown time, these terrifying small spiders had filled up. Even though they were just small spiders, they were the size of 2 fists. They were densely packed and lined up around Luaccio and Hydasir, forming a circle, trapping the 2 of them in the middle. Seeing this, Hydasir nervously took a step back. As soon as he retreated, the space between him and Luaccio shortened. The spiders on the ground also instantly closed in on them. Suddenly, a terrifying little spider dropped down from above and landed in front of Hydasir. Hydasir quickly swiped his palm in front of him. The small spider that was hanging down was immediately torn apart. Luaccio glanced at Hydasir's palm and found that his fingers had become very sharp, like cones. Blood vessels could be seen protruding from his palm. This was probably a way to strengthen his body. However, after the first small spider was torn apart by Hydasir, the other small spiders crawling on the ground instantly attacked. Their crawling speed was abnormally fast. In just the blink of an eye, they had crawled under Hydasir's feet. In the next instant, a large number of spiders covered Hydasir's entire body, completely wrapping him up. Hydasir let out a series of blood-curdling screams as he struggled in pain. After a few moments, he fell to the ground. However, more spiders crawled up, forming a small slope on the ground. It seemed that one of them had been eliminated. All the spiders, including the huge and terrifying spider, were now looking at Luaccio. The small spiders, which were as dense as army ants in the desert, turned their bodies and began to gather towards Luaccio. The huge spider above his head lowered its body and opened its mouth full of venomous fangs. There was no doubt that it could directly swallow an adult's head. The 8 eyes of the giant spider were all staring at Luaccio. When the first spider touched Luaccio's shoes and wanted to climb up his body, Luaccio suddenly said, "Don't make trouble." The 8 eyes of the huge spider blinked. Luaccio continued, "Be quiet." The giant spider and the countless small spiders on the ground blinked their eyes in unison. Luaccio pointed at the water reservoirs and said, "Stay inside." In an instant, the spider that climbed up Luaccio's shoes crawled down. The small spiders under his feet scattered in an instant, turning into a black curtain and crawling towards the surrounding water reservoirs as though they were going home. It was unknown how these small spiders managed to squeeze themselves into the water reservoirs with so many of them. After all the small spiders had squeezed in, only the huge spider was left. It fell from the ceiling, blinked its eyes, and then turned around frantically and jumped into one of the water reservoirs. It was unknown how many small spiders were killed by it. At this time, Luaccio walked to the place where Hydasir had fallen and saw only a black horse clip left behind by Hydasir. However, the horse clip was badly damaged. Luaccio grabbed the horse clip and glanced at it. Apart from that, he did not see any traces of Hydasir. It left quite quickly. Luaccio shook his head and threw the horse clip on the ground. Then, he looked back at one of the water reservoirs. He saw the huge spider poking its head out. But the moment it saw Luaccio looking at it, it shrank back. Luaccio looked around, found a path, and walked out. The huge spider poked its head out again, but it could no longer see Luaccio. It suddenly lowered its head. Although the contents inside were not very developed, it was still thinking about a problem. How long do I have to stay here? When can I go out? I'm also in despair. I just came out. What can I do? I better not go out. That guy is too scary. The zombies' ability to move was very strong. Although they usually moved slowly, once they found a target to attack, it was as if the engine in their body was activated and they became crazy, especially when it came into contact with flesh and blood like almonds. Even though he was an old man, The vigorous vitality in his body was the greatest temptation under the perception of the lost. Zombies rushed in one after another, but they fell one by one under a month's blade. This old man had rich combat experience and knew how to deal the highest damage to a zombie. However, there were too many zombies rushing in. After a while, Amundst was forced to the side of the table. He had no place to retreat because he needed to protect Elisabeth. Elisabeth, who was fighting against the blood-sucking ability, was confused and did not know what was happening outside. "Tu Shinny, is this your doing?" The old man swung his sword and cut down another zombie, and let out an angry roar. "If you can't give me a reasonable explanation, I will use my sword to pierce your heart." He knew that this was a useless shout, but in his shock and anger, he had no choice but to vent some of it. Amundst suddenly raised a blade in his hand, and a faint light began to shine on the blade. But at this time, Amundst suddenly stopped and knelt on the ground. His face was full of pain, and he could only use the blade to support his body, while at the same time, he grasped his heart. "You actually chose, this time, the powerful Holy Knight of the Round Table could not fight against the ruthlessness of time. His body had problems since a long time ago, especially in recent years. The frequency of heart attacks had increased a lot. At this time, a zombie took the opportunity to ram into Amundst, and the huge force instantly knocked him to the ground and rolled a distance of 2 to 3 meters. A fishy taste instantly rushed up Amundst's throat. His internal organs were probably damaged. However, at the moment when he was about to spit out blood, Amundst used all his strength to cover his mouth. At the same time, he widened his eyes in pain and swallowed the blood back. But he still kept his mouth closed, so breathing became more difficult. Amundst glanced at Elisabeth and relaxed a little. These zombies would be interested in fresh blood and flesh. At this time, Elisabeth's vampire blood was the most active, and it had covered her human part, so these zombies would temporarily ignore her existence. But once he was bitten to death by the zombies, it was not difficult for Amundst to guess what would happen next, because these guys had no sense of reason. Gritting his teeth, Amund resolutely took out the medicine bottle that Hiddesil had given him and poured it into his mouth. It had to be said that this product from a magician's association did indeed have a mysterious effect. In just a moment, Amundst felt the pain in his heart ease and calm down, and a large amount of strength gushed out from his limbs. He seemed to have returned to the time when he was young. He suddenly stood up and swung his sword down, easily splitting apart a zombie's body. The endless energy that flowed out of his body not only allowed him to recover his stamina, but he was also able to use some of the sword techniques that he had not been able to use for a long time. He was no longer one of the Holy Knights of the Round Table. Since he betrayed the Holy Knight's motto, he had lost the protection of the Holy Knights and could no longer use the ancient power of the inheritance. But even so, he was still powerful. Amundst, who had regained his strength, instantly held his sword and charged into the zombie crowd. His sword was so fast that only flashes of silver light could be seen. Silver Lightning, this was Amundst's nickname. His sword skills were the fastest and most accurate among the Holy Knights. The slaughter was one-sided. When the last zombie that rushed and fell under Amundst's sword, the old man finally loosened his mouth and slowly exhaled. But at the same time, the endless strength began to slowly fade. The effect of the potion would not last long, but to be able to recover 10% or 20% of his strength was already miraculous enough. But a new wave of zombies appeared at this time. Amundst's face instantly changed. When he was young, he participated in the crusade against the zombies, so he knew the horror of the zombies. It was not their extraordinary strength, but their numbers. It was as if there was no end to them, as if they would never be able to kill all of you and would only maximize your strength. Back then, many trainee Holy Knights had died tragically in the hands of the endless zombie army. "I can't stay here anymore." Amundst wanted to bring Elisabeth out of this place, but the moment Amundst turned around, he froze on the spot, and the expression on his face was not as simple as fear. Elisabeth did not know if it was appropriate to fall to the ground, from the table to the ground. At this time, beside Elisabeth, there was a small bottle. That bottle had been opened, and the thing inside had already flowed out. That was the bottle that contained the pure blood used to relieve Elizabeth's hunger. When did it fall out? Was it when she was hit by the zombies when she was suffering from angina? Amundsen looked at Elizabeth in horror, and at this time, she suddenly opened her eyes. The pure blood was exposed to the air, and the smell of the blood stimulated Elizabeth's vampire instincts. This was the last straw that crushed her human will. Elizabeth suddenly opened her eyes, flipped her body over, and crawled on the ground, her mouth close to the pure blood that was flowing out of the bottle. "Why, Elizabeth?" "No!" Amundsen screamed in despair. But it was all too late. The moment the pure blood was sucked in her mouth, Elizabeth suddenly raised her head, like an awakened lion. She opened her fangs and let out a low roar that had been brewing in her throat for a long time. "Why, Elizabeth?" Amundsen instantly spat out a mouthful of blood. This was the congested blood that he had been suppressing for a long time. He did not dare to spit it out because he was afraid that the blood would trigger a reaction from Elizabeth, but it was all too late. A completely berserk vampire's blood would bring Elizabeth terrifying power, but Amundsen was powerless to stop it this time. Her whole body was pressed against the ground, and at this time, she was like an animal slowly crawling towards Amundsen. Amundsen suddenly took 2 steps back. He did not know if he still had the ability to suppress Elizabeth at this time. Amundsen's face instantly turned pale. However, the blood he spat out not only stimulated Elizabeth, it also stimulated the second wave of zombies. They suddenly became even crazier, letting out roars as they charged towards Amund without regard for anything else. But this seemed to be a serious provocation to Elizabeth at this moment. She stiffly turned her head to look at the zombies that were rushing towards her. Suddenly, a large amount of red vapor-like gas came out of Elizabeth's body. She did not choose to drink Amundsen's blood, but directly rushed into the second wave of zombies. Elizabeth, who had activated the vampire's blood, possessed great power. Every time, Amundsen had to use up his years of accumulation to barely be able to wake her up, just to wake her up, not to defeat her. Elizabeth, Amundsen fell to the ground powerlessly. The effect of the stamina potion had disappeared, and the feeling of powerlessness almost deprived Amundsen of his ability to control his body. At this time, his eyes also became blurry. He only saw a petite figure rampaging through the zombie crowd, simply and violently tearing apart zombies with her bare hands. Elizabeth, in the end, Amundsen could no longer hear the sound of zombies, but at the same time, he could not see Elizabeth's figure. She did not find Amundsen in the end. Perhaps it was the last bit of rationality that made her leave, let her rather look for other blood sources to replace Amundsen who was right in front of her. He hoped so, but at the same time, he was also in despair because he was powerless to stop all of this. Amundsen suddenly felt a sharp pain in his body. He screamed and saw that his leg was being crazily bitten by a zombie. The zombie's body was only left with its chest and left arm, but it still had the ability to move. Elizabeth did not kill the second wave of zombies. She only destroyed the second wave of zombies and then left. Those zombies that were lying on the ground and torn apart, those that only had half of their bodies left, or even just their heads and necks, at this moment, used all kinds of methods and began to rush towards Amundsen. Chapter 883. You think you've escaped and are safe, but in fact you've just fallen into an even bigger trap. Until now, Zhong Luoyue deeply felt the despair of escaping from the tiger's mouth and falling into the wolf's lair. The crowd that had escaped from the scene had dispersed at some point. As he walked, Zhong Luoyue felt that many of the people in front of him had disappeared without him noticing. But when she turned around, there were only a few men and women around her. Their faces were naturally filled with fear. At this moment, they finally realized that the escape route they had taken was probably wrong. This cellar was like a maze. Without anyone to lead the way, they quickly realized a terrifying reality. They were lost. Where's the big guy who broke the door? Why did he leave us behind? A young man stamped his feet angrily. It's all your fault. I lost my way because I was following you. Another woman at this time angrily grabbed the man beside her. You are going to kill me. Jean Luoyue looked at these fellows in silence. Did they not know that Song had no intention of saving anyone? He had only broken the gate so that he could leave earlier to find Song Ying. At this time, the dispute seemed to be escalating. Jean Luoyue looked at this scene coldly. Perhaps, before the blood-sucking monster caught up with them, these people would self-destruct. She didn't want to participate in this escalating struggle, but slowly retreated. She didn't have time to stay here. Since she had lost a clear direction, even if she had to choose, she didn't want to stay here and wait for the threat of death. At this time, besides Jean Luoyue, there was another girl who didn't dare to speak. She just shrank her body in fear. This girl noticed Jean Luoyue's footsteps. She suddenly grabbed Jean Luoyue's clothes and whispered in fear, "You, where are you going? You know the way, don't you?" "I just don't want to sit still and wait for death and self-destruction," Jean Luoyue said calmly. Just as she had said, fear had taken over their reason. Obviously, they were not completely out of danger yet, but these people had miraculously fallen into a manic mood. At this moment, they were actually beating each other up. Why don't you take me with you?" The girl suddenly begged. "I just follow the boss here. I don't want to die here." Jean Luoyue glanced at the girl's clothes. They weren't revealing at all. Instead, they were very decent. Furthermore, she was able to notice her actions. Obviously, she was a relatively calm and observant person. After all, it was still a little dangerous for him to advance alone. He should be able to get some help from this person. Even if he couldn't, he could at least look out for him. Thus, Jean Luoyue nodded slightly, and then made a silent gesture. While everyone was trembling, the two of them cautiously retreated. The girl should be a local, but they could communicate in English. After forming a temporary team, Jean Luoyue naturally found out the name of the other party, Natasha. "You're really a brave person." Walking in the dark passage, they could only rely on the light of the mobile phone to explore. The terrifying environment made Natasha grab the corner of Jean Luoyue's clothes in fear. "I just have to be brave." Jean Luoyue shook her head. "Don't grab me. Go on your own." Natasha hesitated for a moment before letting go of Jean Luoyue's clothes. At this time, Jean Luoyue began to look around the passage, especially the corner of the wall. "What are you doing?" "Looking for any clues." Jean Luoyue calmly said, "Okay, remember the big guy who broke the door?" Natasha nodded, and then said, "That's amazing. Is he Superman?" Jean Luoyue shook her head. "I don't know if he's Superman or not, but I know that he has companions. They should be in the same group. Since the big guy left first, he might have left a mark to inform his companions of his location." Natasha said in surprise, "Since the big guy is so powerful, does that mean as long as we find the mark he left behind, we will be able to get out safely?" Jean Luoyue glanced at Natasha and said, "First, this is just my guess. He might not have left any mark. Second, even if there's a mark, there is no guarantee that the big guy will be able to find a safe place or a way out. This is just an experiment. Don't just stand there. Go to the side and check it out. Additionally, it will be best to take off your high heels. That way, it will be easier for you to move around." Feeling helpless, Natasha could only pick up the mobile phone. Following Jean Luoyue's example, she began searching for any possible mark. She reached out with her hand to touch the wall. Then, the light from a mobile phone slowly swept across the wall. Suddenly, Natasha's phone caught the light of a pale face. At this time, the face opened its eyes. One of the eyes even had no eyeballs. At the same time, the face opened its mouth and spewed out a foul smell. Natasha was so scared that she fell to the ground. She screamed and quickly moved her body, bumping into the wall on the other side of the passage. The mobile phone that had fallen to the ground was now illuminated by the light from the ceiling. A figure walked into the light source. "Zombie, zombie, zombie." There was a bite wound on its neck, and its abdomen was rotten with intestines hanging out. At this moment, the zombie was walking towards Natasha. Natasha was so scared that she started to tremble. Between her legs, there was a liquid that smelled like urine. Seeing this, Jean Luoyue gasped. She shuddered and moved forward a few steps. Then she threw a side kick on the zombie's head, knocking it back and making it fall to the ground. "Let's go." Jean Luoyue quickly reached out and pulled Natasha to her feet. He said a few words quickly, and then pulled her along and dashed out. This was so scary. A vampire like Lady Eve, followed by a zombie from Resident Evil. Zhong Luoyue felt that she had wasted all her self-cultivation in this place. However, what was waiting for her in front was a large wave of zombies, and Songda, who was surrounded by zombies. Songda, who had practiced thwart kung fu, at this time, waved his palms and made a whistling sound. Under the attack of this horrible palm, the zombie's head was directly smashed. At the same time, a lot of guests also fell down in the passageway. They were the first batch to follow Songda out, and had been following Songda closely. However, at this time, Songda had no time to pay attention to these guys. Or rather, he didn't intend to pay attention to them. They were caught by the zombies and were crazily bitten. Help! Help me! A man was twitching all over. His neck was bitten by a zombie, and a lot of blood was splashing in. Zhong Luoyue suddenly felt cold all over. At this time, Songda used the power of his palms to forcibly open a bloody path in the zombie crowd. Zhong Luoyue saw that the distance between Songda and herself was getting farther and farther, and suddenly became anxious. Her heart skipped a beat, and she shouted at Songda's back, "Hero, please wait." Songda could hear. He heard the voice from behind the zombie crowd, and it was Mandarin. Out of instinct, Songda turned back to take a look. "Hero, please take me with you, I know you miss." Zhong Luoyue didn't care about the bad relationship between her and Song Ying at this time. She just took a gamble. As for what would happen after, she would only think about it if she could survive. Song Ying, I know her. I'm her senior from the place where she used to go to school. Zhong Luoyue quickly added. Songda frowned at this time. He, Song Air, and Song San hid in the dark most of the time and were responsible for the safety of Song Tianyu. To put it bluntly, they were actually the diners of the Song family. These three brothers didn't participate in the business of the Song family, so they didn't know too much about the Zhong family. They also didn't really see the people of the Zhong family. Do you really know her, miss? Songda frowned. I swear, Song Ying and I are indeed classmates. Zhong Luoyue said with a serious face at this time. Good. Songda nodded, and then raised his palms to kill the zombies. He didn't have the ability to protect everyone, but if it was only one or two people, it was completely possible. Although these zombies were scary, they could still be killed with one slap. They were much easier to deal with compared to the two monsters at the wine tasting party. At this time, seeing that Songda was willing to come to her rescue, Zhong Luoyue was instantly overjoyed. Hero, thank you. I will definitely repay you for saving my life. Zhong Luoyue seriously promised at this time. She saw that Songda's skills were frightening, and he was like a real martial arts master who was known by word of mouth but hard to meet, so she directly treated him with the ancient etiquette, thinking that it was more appropriate. Songda didn't say much, and just nodded casually, but he always felt that this woman seemed to be able to guess what he was thinking. This woman was not simple. In the midst of so many zombies, she was able to keep calm and size up the situation. Follow me. Songda's palm chopped down the last zombie, and then took the lead to walk in front. But he was sweating. Obviously, killing the zombies here really consumed a lot of physical strength. Zhong Luoyue saw that Songda walked in front, and then occasionally used his palm to touch the wall, leaving a strange mark, so she secretly noted it down. Your physical strength is good, and you're calm enough. The lines of your muscles look good. Songda suddenly turned back at this time, indifferently said, Have you practiced before? Zhong Luoyue nodded and said, The elders in my family asked. When I was a child, I stayed in the army for a period of time. Songda nodded, but suddenly stopped. He suddenly crouched on the ground, his ear close to the ground, and then quickly stood up, frowned, and said, There are a lot of footsteps in front, and it's very messy. It's those zombies just now. What? Zhong Luoyue hurriedly shocked. That kind of thing. There are still more. Songda solemnly said, I'm afraid there are still many hidden here. In this place, there are blood-sucking monsters. There are zombies. It's just like a devil's den. Maybe even I... Zhong Luoyue heard this. Her mood was not good. Song Tiaoyao said, Miss, if I can't handle it later, you can take your friend and leave when you have the chance. Whether you can go far or not, it depends on your fate. Now go this way. Songda pointed to another road. Zhong Luoyue could only nod at this time, with a complicated mood. She wanted to ask for help outside. But in this place, the mobile phone signal was all gone. If she couldn't find a way out, she was completely trapped in a cage full of zombies and vampires. Natasha couldn't understand the conversation between Zhong Luoyue and Songda. At this time, the two seemed to have reached some kind of consensus, and also looked at her intentionally or unintentionally, which made her feel very uneasy. The three didn't speak, and went on another road, each with their own thoughts. Walking in the relatively quiet passage, Luochio heard some messy sounds. Of course, without Hydasil leading the way, it didn't mean that Luochio couldn't find the place. Whether it was the guidance of the unseen, or a kind of perception that he couldn't explain, Luochio could always go to some places where things would happen. After such a long time, Luochio had long been used to it, so he simply let his feelings go. In short, he did this and that. At this time, a door in front opened. Luochio walked to the door and found that it was full of many corpses. Some of these corpses were rotten, but some were still able to move. They were zombies. Luochio saw real zombies for the first time. There should be a large wave of zombies here, but they were killed, so there were so many corpses on the ground. At this time, in the corner of the room, those zombies with only half of the body, or only the head, were piled together and seemed to be eating something. Luochio frowned slightly as he walked to this place. These zombies had no intelligence and didn't know how to be afraid, only a simple conditioned reflex. The previous giant spider had a little intelligence, so it knew to avoid. Luochio waved his hand, and a large group of zombies was pulled by something and scattered in an instant. At the same time, Luochio saw an old man. His legs were almost left with white bones, and his flesh was almost gnawed away. His left arm had disappeared, and only the shoulder was left. His waist had also been bitten open. The old man's face was completely gray. His body was sitting against the wall, but at this time he could slightly raise his head. The old man saw Luochio, and his lips moved slightly. Luochio squatted down, grabbed the old man's hand that was tightly covering his chest, and whispered, "Do you have anything to say?" "You are." The old man's lips moved again. He felt a strange power flowing into his body, and his almost disappearing life seemed to be intercepted. He looked at Luochio and seemed to think of something. "You are the person Takizawa mentioned?" "Takizawa?" Luochio was startled, and then nodded. "It should be me. Your body. Have you used anything that overdraws your life force?" The old man, Amin, coughed out a mouthful of blood. I know my situation. Don't waste your energy." "It's okay." Luochio shook his head. "Although I can't save you now, this consumption is nothing. I've been bitten by zombies. It won't be long before I become like them." Amin quickly said, "I only ask you to kill me. Let me die as a human. Also, I have the inheritance key of the 12 round table paladins. I can give it to you." At this moment, Amin slowly unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a badge on his body. Yin 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 yin. Chapter 884. Luochio picked up the token from Amon's hand and looked at it. The diamond-shaped token had a three-dimensional feel. At the same time, there was a strange coat of arms engraved on it. There was a weak, but at the same time, there was a special flow of energy that made people feel neutral and peaceful. "Why are you giving it to me?" Luochio put down the so-called inheritance key and looked at Amont's eyes that were bloodshot because of pain. There was no transaction. Luochio knew this. This was the first time Luochio came into contact with a transaction as a non-boss. Amont said weakly, "Other than you, I can't wait for anyone else. Maybe you're a good person. Maybe you're a bad person. But to me, you are the only one. I can only entrust this to you. My final wish. I won't let you work for nothing. This key can bring me a chance to inherit the ancient holy knights of the Round Table." Luochio looked at the inheritance key again. Amonst was breathing hard at this time. "Since I left, my seat has been empty. After so many years, I still haven't completed the trial. But this key can bring an unofficial entry. If you're lucky and strong enough, you can also get its power, so this was actually a pass to go through the back door. If there was a strict organization behind the 12 Round Table Paladins, and all the paladins who inherited the title of the 12 Round Table Paladins were strictly controlled, this thing could bypass the control and bring the holder into the secret realm behind the key to obtain the qualifications of the inheritor. Luaccio shook his head. Old man, to be honest, this opportunity is not useful to me, but I can try to help you. What do you want me to do? Just to kill you now? Amund looked into Luaccio's eyes and slowly said, Young life, our meeting is a kind of fate. The clarity in your eyes reminds me of the gaze of the goddess of justice. Perhaps you will not become a knight, but you will definitely be a gentleman. From you, I feel the noble quality of humility and courtesy. You are a person who keeps his promises, Luaccio said indifferently. Elder, it's not good to flatter people. What do you want me to do? You haven't made it clear. But Amant said, I didn't see wrongly. I hope you can find my granddaughter. Elizabeth. She's a hybrid between a vampire and a human. She's in great pain. If she is unable to overcome this pain, please help her. Help her as a human to welcome death. Luaccio was silent for a moment. Under Amund's expectant and uneasy gaze, he said, In my opinion, no matter what kind of life form it is proof that it is alive. You're only clinging to a fixed identity, even going as far as to choose death. Why did you make such a choice? Amund suddenly opened his mouth, but no words came out. Luaccio said again, You made the choice on behalf of your granddaughter? Amund's breathing suddenly became rapid. Luaccio finally said, What is her own choice? Amund's eyes dimmed, and the hand holding the inheritance key gradually loosened, as if he had used up all his strength. Amund's vision blurred, and he seemed to be hallucinating. He heard a call. He heard Elizabeth's voice. He heard her calling out, Grandpa. Amund suddenly grabbed Luaccio's hand tightly. Even when his body was being devoured by the zombies, under the endless biting and tearing, he still managed to endure it. At this moment, his eyes were blurred by tears. Please, let her live. I want her to live. I only want her to live. Amund grabbed Luoccio's palm and suddenly exerted force to make the body that was full of holes sit up. His eyes were opened very lightly, and the light in his eyes showed that the candle was lit up at the last moment. Let her. Live. Come. Down. He roared. Luaccio did not blink. His lips were slightly opened, but he did not speak for a long time. He looked at Amund. The old man's body seemed to have stiffened, and he did not move. He even held his breath. Luaccio said softly, This is your choice. Amund still did not move. His hand was like an iron clamp, tightly grabbing Luaccio's hand, but Luaccio knew that at this moment, the old man's life had come to an end. Luaccio used his hand to pry open Amund's fingers, and then laid his body down. He looked at Amund's eyes that were wide open, and his mouth that was not closed after the roar. He took the inheritance key necklace from his body. In the palm of his hand, the necklace twirled around his palm twice. Luaccio clenched his hand, then looked at Amund, and said softly, I'll take it. After that, Luaccio used his palm to brush Amund's eyes, allowing him to close his eyes. Luaccio's palm was still pressed in front of Amund's eyes, and he did not let go. There was no such thing as a gentle push from the palm, but Amund's body shattered in an instant. Like a broken mirror, the fragments flew away from Luaccio's body, turning into little spots of light, and wrapped around Luaccio's body. The room lit up, as if a galaxy and nebula were born. In the center, a ray of light slowly rose. It was all that was Amundsen, his thought, his will, his soul imprint on earth, his soul. Luaccio grabbed the soul in his hand, and at the same time, opened his left hand, and a box appeared. He put Amund's soul into the box. It was not a transaction item, so it did not need to be stored, and it did not need anything. It only needed to stay quietly in the box, and it would not dissipate. The box was transparent in the middle, and it constantly emitted a star-like luster, which was fascinating. Luaccio slowly exhaled and stood up with the box. The light gradually dissipated, and the room returned to normal. At this time, the zombies whose bodies were destroyed, but not dead, crawled towards Luaccio on the ground and made meaningless sounds. Rest in peace. The zombies in the room were all smashed into pieces, leaving no flesh and blood. Luaccio suddenly glanced at the corner of the wall above the room, then slowly walked out of this place. The screen embedded in the wall clearly reflected the eyes that were looking at him. He found us. This was the innermost laboratory, the pure white room. Uncle Kim looked at Tushini in surprise, and even a little frightened. He looked uneasily at him. There was no doubt that they saw the whole process from why Lisabeth's rage to Amon's final dissipation. They could see most of the things in the maze through the surveillance cameras installed in all the major places. Tushini looked at another screen as if nothing had happened, and said indifferently, "If it were you, wouldn't you think of something when you saw the surveillance camera?" "I'm just—" Uncle Gene frowned and shook his head. Then he hesitated and said, "I'm just scared by this gaze. I don't know how to describe it. It's just a strange feeling of coldness." Tushini said indifferently, "He is not looking at you. Just do your own thing. Why can't you find him?" Uncle Kim calmed down and asked, "You mean Hidesil?" Tushini said, "Among these guys, the easiest to deal with is Takizawa, who seems to be the most cunning. The most difficult to deal with is Hidesil. He is a dark merchant and has many unclear relationships with the Magician Association. His ancestor was once the owner of this place. There are too many uncertainties." As he said that, the alarm in the room suddenly sounded. Uncle Kim was shocked. He quickly picked up the remote control on the table, aimed it at one of the screens on the wall, and pressed the button. What appeared on the screen was none other than Hidesil. Right now, he was standing in front of a huge steel door. In his hand, he was holding a whip made of red light. At this moment, he was waving the red light whip, continuously lashing at the steel door that was blocking him. Every time he lashed, a dent would appear on the steel door, and the crack in the door would widen. It would not take long for the steel door to be broken by Hidesil. How did he get here? Uncle Kim was shocked and angry at this time, because he was only an ordinary person after all. Facing an inhuman power, he was not as fragile as an ant to him. "You stay here. I'll go and meet him." Tushini stood up at this time and pressed the button next to the table at the same time. The mechanism on the table suddenly opened. The daylily series on the table quickly sank into the table. This table was not so much a table as a platform. Tushini walked out of the room quickly. After the door closed, Uncle Kim suddenly breathed heavily. He walked to the edge of the platform and groped around. Uncle Kim tried for a while, but still could not open the mechanism of the platform. Uncle Kim frowned, then suddenly walked to the door, put his ear on the door, and listened quietly for a while. At this time, Uncle Kim quickly took out a small bottle from his arms. He opened the bottle and smeared the contents on his finger. It was a blood-red liquid. It was blood. Uncle Kim used his finger smeared with the blood in the bottle to touch the mechanism on the platform again. With a click, the mechanism was obviously triggered. Uncle Jin's face lit up with joy as he looked at the containers containing different daylily series that were slowly coming towards him. His breathing gradually became faster. "I won't just believe your words." Uncle Kim muttered to himself, "I believe in myself more." Bang! A zombie flew out because it could not bear Songda's King Kong palm. But at the same time, more zombies rushed towards Songda, as if they could not kill them all. Songda, Zhong Luoyue, and Natasha, who formed a temporary team, did manage to avoid a wave of zombies, but soon they unfortunately ran into a new wave. These zombies seemed to be able to emerge from everywhere, and the number was increasing. Even some zombies were obviously rotten to the point that they did not look like humans, but they still moved quickly. Where did these things come from? Natasha was so frightened that she directly grabbed Zhong Luoyue's arm. Zhong Luoyue could not help but let out a painful groan. Natasha was shocked and quickly let go of her hands. "I'm sorry, did I hurt you?" Zhong Luoyue shook her head. "It's not your fault. I hurt myself before." The position that Natasha was grabbing was right below the shoulder that Madame Eve had scratched when she was fighting with Madame Eve. But at this time, Natasha saw that Zhong Liu's face was pale and cold sweat appeared on her forehead. She seemed to be in great pain. She could not help but feel guilty and quickly asked. Zhong Liu made a gesture of silence. At this time, they were under the protection of Songda. Although no zombies could approach them, Songda had some restrictions. Zhong Liu said directly, "Don't make any noise, don't distract him, it's very dangerous. If something happens to him, we will only be in more danger. So, we must not become a burden." Natasha quickly nodded and then forcefully covered her mouth. Zhong Liu at this time gently scratched her shoulder and suddenly gasped in pain. But she clenched her teeth and forcibly held back the sound of pain. There were countless zombies in this underground maze. It was not a good idea to continue like this. Songda's strength would be exhausted sooner or later. At that time, not to mention whether he had the ability to protect himself, whether he would stay or not would be a test of his humanity. Zhong Liu was secretly anxious. Looking at the zombies that kept coming out, she suddenly had a strange idea. At first, although the clothes of the zombies were tattered, but after all, it was still possible to see that they were modern products. But this time, the zombies that came out were wearing some old leather armor, and the degree of decomposition of their bodies was more serious. This wave of zombies, were they ancient people? While he was thinking, Songda suddenly roared. He jumped up and slapped the zombie's head. Immediately, the zombie's head was smashed into pieces. Songda sighed, turned around, and said, "Let's go." This wave of zombies all died under Songda's palm. At the same time, his body was sweating more, and his whole face was directly soaked. Seeing this, Natasha hurriedly grabbed a pack of tissues from her body, walked in front of Songda, and wiped the sweat on his face. The passage was stuffy and hot, not to mention Songda. In fact, Zhong Liu and Natasha were already sweating. Natasha was wearing cool clothes, but at this time, she was sweating and her clothes were sticking to her skin. Out of gratitude, she carefully wiped the sweat for Songda, and her body was almost attached to Songda's body. What's worse is that Songda seemed to find that this woman didn't seem to be wearing underwear. At this time, the two protruding points of her chest intentionally or unintentionally rubbed against his body. Songda was scared and quickly recited the Diamond Sutra in his heart. And Natasha seemed to be aware of the embarrassing part, but if she stopped now, it would seem more embarrassing. So she sped up the movement of her hands, and the wiping action also became faster. Zhong Liu saw the reaction of these two people, but didn't have too many thoughts and didn't intend to say anything. She just took the opportunity to recover her physical strength. However, at this time, Zhong Liu suddenly felt a tingling sensation on her neck. In the darkness behind her, at this moment, a face suddenly appeared. It's Lady Eve. At this time, Lady Eve's pair of fangs had completely pierced Zhong Liu's neck. "Finally found you, my beautiful child." Zhong Liu's mouth opened. She only felt that at this moment, her body not only didn't feel pain, but there was a strange kind of pleasure, making her whole body become sensitive. She couldn't help but let out a sorrowful but excited moan.